Good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Lakewood City Council in the city of Lakewood, Colorado on June 26, 2017 at 7 p.m. in council chambers. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul.
Here.
Coop.
Here.
Wickman. Here. Gutwein.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Harrison.
Here.
Royball.
Here.
Vincent.
Here.
Abel.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Shakti.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Fantastic. So I want to welcome everybody for coming out tonight. It's great to see you. Appreciate you spending time with us, and also welcome to those folks tuning in via the computer or maybe Channel 8. If you do happen to have a cell phone, I'd ask that you put it on silent. And we are going to take a moment to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll remain standing for a moment of silent prayer. And I have two special guests who are going to come down and lead us. Not only is one working on a badge, they also happen to be from the O'Kane family. So it's a perfect night for all this to happen. Welcome.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do you gentlemen want to introduce yourself into the mic?
Hi, I'm Vincent Capus O'Kane. I go to Liberty Common High School.
All right.
I'm Gabriel Crapus O'Kane. I go to St. Joe's.
Awesome. Well, we are thrilled to have you here tonight, and hopefully can continue to honor your family's history and legacy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to make a recommendation to change a couple things up in light of the fact that we have kind of a longer presentation set first. I'd like to go ahead and jump items 6 and 7 in front of item 4. So that would be the consent agenda, which is one item. And then item 7, the ordinance that has to do with the O'Kane farm. That way our folks who drove all the way down here don't have to stay till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So if that's okay, we'll go ahead and do that. And I'll ask the clerk to please read item 6 into the record, which is the consent agenda.
The consent agenda consists of item 6, Resolution 2017-22, endorsing amendment to Lakewood 2017-2018 Head Start grant application for purpose of submitting requests to federal government for supplemental funds available to provide cost of living adjustment to staff in Head Start and Early Head Start.
Okay, thank you. I'll now open the public hearing. Nobody wished to speak on this consent agenda item, which is Resolution 2017-22. Anybody wish to speak? Seeing none, I will close public comment and ask for a motion.
Okay, Mayor Paul, I move for the adoption of Resolution 2017-22, which includes in the consent agenda introductions into the record by the city clerk.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on Resolution 2017-22. Any comments, concerns? Please cast your votes. And that carries 11 ayes, 0 nays. Will the clerk please read item 7 into the record?
Item 7, Ordinance O-2017-9, designating the property known as the O'Kane Farm located at 6795 West 1st Avenue, Lakewood, Colorado, 80226, County of Jefferson, State of Colorado, as a local historic district.
Great. Thank you, and I will welcome up to the podium Ms. Holly Boehm, Principal Planner with the City of Lakewood, for a short presentation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor and City Council. I'm Holly Boehm with Comprehensive Planning and Research. Okay, thank you. Tonight I am here to ask City Council to approve the Historic Preservation Commission's recommendation to designate the O'Kane Farm as a local historic district. The O'Kane Farm is located in O'Kane Park off of First Avenue near Pierce Street in northeast Lakewood. The site is a 0.3 acre site. It contains 4 contributing structures and is an excellent and rare example of surviving example of the city's agricultural history. The site is made up of the main house, which was constructed around 1900. The second resource on the site is a barn that was constructed in the late 1880s to 1890s. The third resource on the site is the bunkhouse, which was constructed around the same time as a barn, approximately 1880s to 1890s. It is thought that this home served as a main home while the main house, Resource 1, was being constructed. There's also a well on the site, which was constructed later in 1942. The well is currently encased, as you can see in the bottom photograph, for safety purposes, but underneath that encasement, the well is completely intact and can be restored. The original land was originally acquired by William Fraser in 1888. He acquired approximately 5 acres of land. In 1901, Bernard O'Kane purchased the land from Mr. Fraser. Mr. O'Kane came to Colorado, like many people of the time, to do mining out in the mountains of Colorado, although he did end up settling here in what is now known as Lakewood. Mr. O'Kane married Elizabeth in 1903, and together they ran the Harp Dairy Farm on the site, which is very typical dairy that was run back in the 1880s, 1890s in the area. They were particularly known for traveling into downtown Denver to deliver milk, and especially had a reputation for visiting some of the red light districts and selling it to some of the interesting folks that were in that area in downtown Denver. Together they grew the farm to about 28 acres until Mr. O'Kane's untimely death in 1980. Together they had 6 children that Mrs. O'Kane was left with after his passing. In addition to his passing, she also lost 2 children during her time. But she persevered and continued to farm the land, continuing to grow alfalfa and hay on the site until her death in 1969. The most well-known of their children is Barney O'Kane Jr. Barney was born in 1918 along with his twin sister, Betsy. He served in World War II, and upon his return from the war, he ran for and was elected to the Colorado State House of Representatives. He then was elected as district attorney for the 1st Judicial District, where he really made a name of himself in his relentless and tireless campaign against illegal gambling in the area. And this, I have to say, added quite a bit of conflict with religious institutions and the charities in the area who actually looked for some of the revenues from bingo, slot machines, and the like. So he was quite well known, so well known that he became named the Sentinel's Man of the Year in 1957. He was also named, prior to wedding Joanne Little, he was also named as Jefferson County's most eligible bachelor. So he was quite well known in the area. He and his wife moved to Arvada eventually, where he continued to practice law into the 1990s. He passed away in 2000. The farm was sold, the majority of the acreage of the farm was sold to Lakewood in 1978. And as one of the descendants of the family said later, you know, they had had their time on the farm and they loved the land, and now it was time to share it with the community. In 1984, the city developed and opened O'Kane Park, obviously in honor of the O'Kane family. And in 2001, the city purchased the remaining 0.3 acres, which is before you today. On May 16th, there was a public hearing before the Historic Preservation Commission. The Historic Preservation Commission found that the site meets 3 designation criteria contained in the Lakewood zoning ordinance. They found that it met criterion A by being an intact example of early agricultural history that was in East Central Jefferson County in the early 1900s. They found that it met criterion B as it was associated with Bernie or Bernard O'Kane, who was a very significant person in Jefferson County. The commission also found that it met criterion C in that it is a great example and collection of extant buildings representative of property types typically found on small farms. The Preservation Commission recommended that City Council approve the local landmark designation of the O'Kane Farm as a local historic district. Notification for tonight's meeting has been in accordance with Section 1711 4.6 of the Lakewood zoning ordinance. Notice was provided to the property owner, who is the City of Lakewood. Legal notice was also published in the city's publication of record. We provided courtesy notice to the neighborhood as well as to the Krapis family. No, the property was posted according to the zoning ordinance on the 4 boundaries of the district: south, north, east, and west. Tonight again, I'm asking that City Council approve the Historic Preservation Commission's recommendation to designate the O'Kane Farm as a local historic district. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. And I'm going to now open the public hearing on this this ordinance. And Kelly, you're first up. Come on down. So just as a reminder to those maybe not familiar with City Council, you have 3 minutes. The little box up there will glow green until 2.5. It'll go yellow. At 3, it'll go red. And if you haven't wrapped up, I'll politely try to get you to speed up. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kelly Krapis, and I am the granddaughter of Barney and Bonnie O'Kane, and I am the daughter of Barney and Joanne O'Kane. And I just wanted to, on behalf of the O'Kane family, thank you very, very much, not only the City of Lakewood, but the Heritage Community Center staff and Michelle Neerling, I'm not sure if she's here or not, and also Tom Simmons, who did such a beautiful job of his research behind the property and our family. After my aunt, the last surviving aunt, passed away in 1998, my Aunt Betsy, she lived in the house all of her life. And after her death, we had several private individuals approach us about purchasing the property for private use. But it was the family's desire that the O'Kane, the remaining property, be open to the community. So there's always that historic reminder of what the City of Lakewood was built on. This property is just one of many farms that were viable back in the early 1900s. So again, on behalf of the O'Kane family, thank you very much for your consideration.
Thanks for coming down tonight. Ms. Heckle, did you wish to speak? All right, come on down. Good evening. Welcome.
My name is Barbara Heckle, and I live in the O'Kane Park neighborhood since 1980. I've been very active in getting this house saved, and along with many of the people who belong to the O'Kane Park Neighborhood Association. They're really worked very hard to get this done. The O'Kane house, barn, and bunkhouse are located on the property purchased by Barney and Elizabeth O'Kane in 1895. The O'Kanes were among the earliest settlers in Jefferson County, and as such were an essential part of Lakewood's history. The property is a somewhat rare example of the original farmhouse with intact outbuildings and the original configuration with an urban area. What does that mean? That means when you bring your children and your grandchildren there, you can show them this is how people lived when they first came here to Lakewood. And you can see the barn, they can see the back, they can see the house. It's our history. It's very important to us. I feel that way anyway. The The O'Kane House has been an integral part of our neighborhood. It identifies us. It serves as a place for gathering. Every year, we go and we decorate the house with Christmas lights, and we have a big ceremony. We turn the lights on. They serve hot chocolate. Everybody sings Christmas carols. It's a gathering of the neighbor. You should see the amount of people that are there. A lot. It's really a wonderful thing. Also, in the summertime, we have an annual picnic every year, and we've been opening the house up so people could come in and see the inside of the house. Most years, Kelly's been there and talking to the neighbors about the O'Kanes and the house, and people go upstairs and they go through all the rooms. It's really a great opportunity. This year, our picnic is going to be on July 23rd. And we invite all of you to come and you get a chance to see the inside of the house. It's really nice. As we were told, we went before the Historic Preservation Commission, and they approved us, and that's why we're here, to get you to approve this. It's a wonderful thing for Lakewood to have a building and buildings like that, so that it's our history. That's the way things are. It's really great. So I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. Leslie, do you wish to speak, or you just are in favor? Okay, great. Carolee, same. Do you wish to speak? Come on down.
I'm here to represent the O'Kane Park Neighborhood Association. Tricia's in Italy right now, so I'd just like to say that the association supports the preservation, and we want to thank the mayor and the council, the Historic Preservation Commission, and the city for working on the house. The paint job made it look like new, and it brings out the architectural features of the house. So we just hope that you designate the O'Kane Farm as a historical district.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak about the O'Kane House? All right, seeing none, I will close public comment and go to questions and comments. Mayor Pro Tem Harrison.
I just have a question for Kelly, if she can answer this. I noticed that the name of the dairy was Harp Dairy. Is there a secret behind that name of Harp Dairy? Okay, thank you. But I support this and think it's a wonderful celebration of our first historic designation, so thank you.
And just for the record, for those that couldn't hear, the name could have been because of the Irish heritage. So just want to make sure that that's on the record. Ms. Shakti.
I just want to echo that it's a special day when we can preserve this cool property. And it's also special because we're seeing the Historic Preservation Commission develop. So they started out looking at sort of researching what properties there are and this kind of thing. And this is our first designation. And so it's great to see that process. And I also want to give a thank you to the neighbors and all the people who've put a lot of work into this. So.
Thank you. Councilor Gutwein.
Yes. Excuse me. Thank you also to the O'Kane family and to all the neighbors who worked on this project. I'm so excited to support this. I think it's a really important part of moving forward that we preserve our history. So I think this is exciting for Ward 2 and also for Lakewood. Thank you.
Councilor Franks.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo some of the sentiments. I'm a third-generation Coloradan. My family was dairy farmers, and so I just love that. I came to Lakewood for that very feel. The reason why I'm here is I love the horse properties, I love the older areas, and I just think it's such a nice thing to be able to take a piece of property and not turn it over to being a private residence, but to let the people of Lakewood enjoy it. So thank you.
Councilor Abel.
Thank you. 3 years ago, I believe, it was before I was elected to council, I attended the meeting about designating, or about the future of the O'Kane site. And the mayor was there, and Councilman Coop was there, and since they both have worked very hard to get this done. So thank you both.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Vincent.
I know everybody will be shocked and awed that I support this immensely. I've worked on this forever and for a very, very long time. And what I was so happy about and what caused so much support from me was the fact that the neighborhood was so involved in it. So the family was, the city was, and the neighborhood gave such tremendous support. In fact, I remember Ms. Heckel having me over to her house and showing me about, I don't know, 102 pounds of documentation that they had, and I went through it. And the Historical Commission, I was on that for a while, and we had started that going. So I am so glad that this is the first one. And just in case you're afraid that you don't have anything to do, I've had about 6 people call me with action items that you can work on. I know, so call me. I've got some. Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you, and of course I'll be supporting this. I want to recognize the Historic Preservation Commission, and that's Andrea Collins, Jim Havey, Audra Kirk, Nicole Lane, Jeannie Ramsey, who's the chair, she's here tonight with us, Dave Schaff, and Rebecca Silva. So thank you for your hard work, and this was your first go around as well, and I'm honored to support it. I want to thank the family for making it down, and it's a great honor to be part of this tonight to celebrate. You know, when I first got on city council, I heard about the O'Kane Park crew, and it's a mighty crew, and the neighborhood really cares a lot, and there's a lot of folks who've been working for a long time. So it's fantastic to see it all come tonight. So I'm going to ask Councilmember Coop to make a motion, please.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. Well, I am honored to make this motion to approve ordinance 02017-9 on this, the second and final reading, on behalf of the O'Kane family, its descendants and relatives, the O'Kane Park neighborhood, and also on behalf of the house's brand new, freshly painted pink door.
I second the motion.
There's a motion and a second. Any more discussion or comments? All right, please cast your votes. And that passes 11 ayes, 0 nays. Congratulations. All right. And before, I mean, you're more than welcome to hang all night, but I understand. But before you do go, Councilor Coop wanted to say something.
Yeah, I really just want to second everything everybody has said, to thank you to the O'Kane family, Kelly, your family, the amount of time and effort you have put on this, Barb, who has worked tirelessly for more than anybody else on any other project that I have been aware of and keeping this alive and keeping this in front of everybody and making this happen. Holly, the work that you put into it and getting people lined up to do all the surveys, the research behind this. In reading through this packet, I've learned stuff that I had no idea, and I thought that I knew quite a bit of what happened on that property. The Historic Preservation Commission, and this is on a bigger scale. Thank you for this. I know you've been around for 4 years or so. You're kind of getting the groundwork done. This is the first one through, and in the grand scheme of things, it is so important because every single one of us sitting up here knows of a property in our own areas that need to follow this too at some point in time. So now that this process has been set up, I look for more of these to happen across the city. Thank you again for everybody, the support for everybody else, from everybody else in the O'Kane neighborhood and from across the city for this. This really, really is a special time for the entire city of Lakewood. So thank you.
Well, thank you. All right.
Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Sure. And we tweeted out that the grandkids let us in.
Debbie's not here.
Okay, we're good.
It's the good stuff. Very cool. All right. Will the clerk please read item 4 into the record?
Item 4, discussion, housing study.
All right. So I will now introduce Nanette Nealon, our Economic Development Director, who has been working diligently for a while on this and has been seeing all kinds of numbers and information. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight is your third of your 4th meetings that you're planned to have. Today, we're going to go over the developer financing at a high level and then affordable housing financing. We changed the agenda around from your memo, and the last one will be the last of the information download. At the conclusion of this meeting, we're going to get ready for the next meeting will be the policy discussion. So if there's any technical things that you want further to understand, get clarification on, please feel free to ask David or myself, and we'll follow up with you, such that our hope is at the end of July and more likely August, we'll have the policy discussion begin. So with that, I'd like to introduce David Schwartz. He's from EPS, and he's the vice president, and he is the heavy lifter on this whole project. Thank you.
Thanks on that. Mr. Schwartz, welcome.
Thank you again. Nice to see everybody again.
We have like 1,100 slides, I think.
I can assure you tonight it's slimmed down from our previous. And I was just thinking it's only 7:27, and we're beginning this. No. I was going to say I've got too much energy for this, such an early time in the evening, and we've got a full audience, so we can't take as much time as we have, shall I say, enjoyed taking in the past.
Well said.
All right. So tonight, let's see. I'm going to have to work with. Oh, here. All right, so the goals for this evening, Nanette has indicated the framework of the discussion is a little bit altered, but it still conforms to the outline that she presented to you in the memo. Want to have a brief discussion of general project feasibility and risk assessment. I think really the key there and the key issue is risk assessment, and then look at affordable project feasibility and how those elements of risk translate into that type of development feasibility. And then wrap up the discussion of the supply-demand analysis. I know that there are varying appetites for this level of information. This probably won't satisfy those on one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum. I've tried to boil it down to some things that are maybe relevant higher level. And then really my hope is that at that point, we'll have a bit more sense of readiness to engage in the next more policy-oriented discussion. Whatever direction that takes, honestly, and I do want to iterate that because when we get to that point, it really is up to you as the governing body, representative of the community, to identify which direction to take. So the outline is here, parts 1 and part 2. I'll show you a little reference slide each time we come to one of these breaking points. Part 2 is broken down into several questions that essentially are the 5 questions that were in that outline. So the first of which is development finance, and we'll look at 3 pieces of information there. Basics of the sources and uses and feasibility, timing and risk, and project go, no-go decision. So to begin with, we're looking at, when we think about a project's costs, there are sources and there are uses. Those sources are traditionally debt and equity in most projects, is where funding comes from, and they are used for land, soft costs, hard costs of construction, and developer fee. There's a lot of variation in both of these elements. There's a lot of variation depending on the lending market and market conditions when it comes to the amount of debt that is typically put into a project, and that means that equity or developers and their investors need to respond commensurately. So if you think about pre-recession levels, so before 2007, a lot of the buildings that were being built around the MSA were being financed maybe around 60% debt and 40% equity, or they were being financed at much higher levels with cheaper rates. Depends on the profile of risk, but as underwriting standards have tightened, the ability of projects to receive a certain amount of conventional financing has diminished, and so that increases the level of risk. But in a market like the Denver MSA, risk is mitigated by the strength of the market. On the other side, on the uses side, land depends on the type of project it is. So the land cost as a percent of the total development cost can range anywhere from 5% to 20 or 25%, depending on the type of building it is. So large-scale developments can have sometimes lower percentages of total development costs being land. Land-intensive uses like single-family developments can have higher percentages of land costs as a percent of total project costs. Soft costs, again, depend on scale and location. So the higher you go, often the higher the soft costs go, because typically you have more hard costs, you have more contingencies, more risks associated with different types of building code. And developer fee is traditionally between about 5 and 10% in terms of total project costs. So what does this mean in terms of financial feasibility? Feasibility is when the value of a project exceeds the costs. It generates a competitive return, and those returns reflect the risks commensurate with the project. So basically you have project revenues or net sales or capitalized net operating income from a rental project minus costs equals some kind of a profit. So that basically that's the subtraction problem that happens when you're looking at financial feasibility. But assessing feasibility means really balancing risks and rewards. So returns have to reflect a variety of different risks. There are lots of different risks here. Market changes such as business cycles. I've mentioned before that we're in the midst of an apartment cycle, an apartment business cycle. We're in, what did I say, about the 6th or the 7th year of that, where vacancies are now going to begin fluctuating a bit upward. We're hearing reports of oversupply anecdotally, both anecdotally and in newspapers. So that's an indication of a market change about to happen. So when developers are looking at projects, they're looking at those kind of market business cycles. Physical variables can affect this, contamination being a big one. If you have brownfield sites where sometimes you don't even know if you're going to encounter contamination, that's a risk that needs to be assessed. Cost escalation, labor costs have been escalating, especially as labor supply has been decreasing. That drives labor costs up. Materials costs constantly are escalating, and financing changes from period to period. And then there are procedural risks. There is time and cost of plan review. There are also community situations where there is opposition to types of development that is something that developers have to assess. So these different pieces of risk generate additional risk premiums. There's development risk premium, market risk premium, operating risk, and there's exit risk. Each of these can be characterized in terms of a risk premium. So when a developer is thinking about whether or not a project is feasible, they're thinking about being able to achieve a certain rate of return. And there are a lot of metrics that characterize rate of return. Internal rate of return for projects. There is return on cost, return on equity for a specific equity investment. But typically you talk about rates of return and a hurdle rate or a threshold rate needing to be about 10 to 12%. So when you calculate the present value of all of the future revenue streams, either from rents in the future or from the sales of projects in the future, you need to identify whether or not that's going to hurdle over or surpass that internal rate of return. So in assessing these risks, that hurdle rate adjusts up or down depending on the level of risk, with cost overruns, market risks, slow absorption rates, operating risk, whether or not you can achieve certain occupancy levels, and exit risk, future market for the sale of a rental property, for example. So in this, I want to just highlight a bit of an example here, which is a rental project. It's based on today's market. It is generalized a little bit. I can tell you it's not in the city of Lakewood. We're working with a developer on a project that is on a transit line. This project is 5/1 construction. It has approximately 200 units. The site is 3 1/3 acres. That's about 60 units per acre. The parking ratio is a little bit higher than what you might be looking at in the city, at 1.5 spaces per unit with surface and structured parking. Total development costs are $46 million. Land at $30 a square foot, which is not too different from what you're looking at in some places along the West Line, for example. Hard costs are $140 a square foot, and soft costs are 25% of hard costs. So thinking about when these costs hit, there are a lot of costs that are upfront. These upfront costs are land, they're surveying, planning, paying for guys like us to do market studies to assess the strength of the market, for paying for engineering, and a lot of the plans that come to councils like you and planning commissions, development review boards, and the breakdown of debt to equity in this case means that most of the equity is expended in the first general kind of planning month of this. So all the costs, and I shouldn't say planning months, I should say that a lot of these costs are borne before construction really starts. So that first bit in month 1 to 2 is land acquisition and all those other costs that I just indicated. So equity at 25%, which is about $7 or $8 million, is all spent all at once, up in the first part of the project, and then conventional financing is taking care of the rest. So equity is in first, and it's also out last, by the way. I mean, out first. So there it is, the land acquisition, property taxes. I just went through that. Question is, but what if there are delays? This is a question that we get asked a lot, and so that's why I wanted to present you with a little bit of a visualization of this. Taking this pro forma and converting it into a bit of a scenario analysis, doing a sensitivity on a delay in the process, this shows the number of, across the x-axis is the number of months in the planning process. Typically, we advise that a 6-month planning process is typical. So that means from the time of initial submittal to review to revision to final approval is going to be about 6 months. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what you should shoot for, or whether that is or isn't what Lakewood typically looks at, but in conventional terms, if we're talking about 6 months, this reflects approximately a 20% return on equity in month 6 for the equity investor. Now, generally, equity investors are looking for anywhere between 15 and 20% return on their money, which means that it's reflective of risk. If the project is riskier, they're going to push the required rate of return higher. So if a planning process, for example, is delayed, it knocks down the projected return on equity by about $200,000 a month. That knocks down the rate of return by about 0.3%, or about 30 to 40 basis points on that return on equity. So I had some arguments with my staff about the nomenclature of this, but effectively, the longer these processes take, the more it costs the project on a monthly basis. So when when we're asked to identify risks in project in certain markets, one of the things that has to be understood is whether or not there's a predictable process. And a predictable process means there isn't the risk of delay in a procedure. The more that there is unpredictability in this process, the riskier this becomes, and the more the developer is going to require that a return be of a certain higher percentage. So if there's risk of the project being delayed, then it's very likely that it results in a project no-go decision, meaning that the project simply can't produce the type of required return to meet the level of risk. So the go, no-go decision is really based on a number of considerations. Is the market going to weaken? Is it going to stagnate? Is it going to stay strong? What type of neighborhood opposition might there be? What type of entitlement and permitting process is there? The regulatory process, so the city framework for reviewing the project, construction cost escalation, operating risk, and financing risk. These all go into assessing risk of project feasibility. That's really kind of an abbreviated 101. Maybe we should call it's half of 101. It's project feasibility 52. We're not even full 101. But I did want to go into the affordable project feasibility to look at a bit of a similarity in terms of the structures. So look at the feasibility and look at, I think the key issue here is not necessarily risk assessment, but it's really gap closure. And why that's important. So I drew these up, and I just wanted them to be the same for the purpose of sort of repetition, but it's in reality, you wouldn't have the same breakdown of sources of funding for an affordable project. You would have a much different balance between, say, equity, being if it's a low-income housing tax credit project, it's going to have anywhere from 30 to 65 or 70% tax credit equity, and then there are other sources such as conventional financing. There are urban renewal funds, district funding, grants, entitlement funds, and things like that. But the cost structure of how they're used is the same. The land still costs the same, soft costs are the same, hard costs and the developer fee is typically about 10% as well. Again, variation in all those things is the case. So looking at the same structure, feasible development occurs when x minus y equals z. But in this case, the project value or the sales or the capitalized NOI is much less than it would be for market rate development. So if you're looking at something that is income restricted or that something that is affordable, it's not going to generate through the market itself sufficient revenues to cover those costs. So you could say that profit is unsure, but in these cases, often profit isn't even a part of looking at moving an affordable project forward. It's really about financing the gap between the difference of what the market can support and what those costs are. So the issue is gap closure. Well, I want to take a little bit of time, not too much, but go through this little diagram of the construction cost versus the market value of units priced at different area median income levels. So remember, AMI is area median income, and it's broken down by these segments, which are typical for kind of discussing below market rate housing. So the first is market values based on rent or purchase prices. If it were realistic that you built a unit and sold it to somebody who was earning less than 30% of the area median income, they could only afford about a $50,000 unit. Or if you capitalize the rents from the affordable rent for that income level, it would equal approximately the same amount in terms of a per unit value. So that's the value for the 30% AMI unit. Then there's the 50% AMI unit at about $108,000. 190 for the 80%, 245 for the 100%. So that's median income for Lakewood. If you're earning 120% AMI, that jumps up to 300, 382, and 519 at 200% AMI. So those are the values. Now here's the construction cost. These vary depending on location, primarily because of land value. But if the construction cost right now is hovering around for land, hard cost, soft cost, and developer fee about $240,000 per unit. So that means that obviously you're looking at a gap in the lowest one, a gap in the second one, and a gap in the third one. Clearly the gap for financing, for closing the gap on making a project work at that lowest level is really next to impossible. The gap is pretty large for a unit at 50% AMI and also still fairly large at 80% AMI. So the sources of gap closure really focus typically on those three bands of household income levels. And the key here is the magnitude of sources that are needed. 30%, in some previous slides and previous sessions, we've talked about what these income bands are, how they're characterized. This lowest one is supportive services. Typically under 30% AMI is homelessness. It is serious need of supportive services, and this requires construction subsidies, so capital subsidies. It requires operational subsidies. It requires both home and CDBG dollars to be put at it. In terms of subsidies, it usually requires Section 8 vouchers. It requires low-income housing tax credits, competitive tax credits at 9%, requires state grants to go into it, and immense local resources. The point is it requires quite a large magnitude of sources, and it is very difficult to produce projects at that level. That's why you rarely see those kind of projects proceed, and only during times when there are sufficient resources available. The income band where most of the activity occurs is typically in this very low income band, but only for 9% projects, because when you're talking about low-income housing tax credit projects, CHAFA requires that if you're going to receive 9% tax credits, which fund 65% of a project's costs, that you provide units that meet needs for 30 to 60% of the area and median income. So again, you've got a large magnitude of sources that go to this, because you've got a gap of about $75,000 or more per unit. So construction subsidies, you don't need operational subsidies because you're not talking about supportive services here, and also those other same sources. And then at the higher income level, at 50 to 80, this is low, moderate income housing. So this is typically where the 4% tax credit projects get developed, which are like private activity bonds. These are available in limitless supply. You can issue private activity bonds until you're blue in the face. But those are primarily the source for higher income, or what the affordable industry calls market rate housing, at the 80% income level. There are local fee waivers that can usually help close additional gaps, but typically in peak market cycles or peak business cycles, 4% are used, and in business cycles like during the time of the recession and the following 4 years, we didn't see any 4% used, because it requires that rents are typically sufficiently high for those income levels, and competitively considering the environment, to actually close the gap itself. So that's why these projects are not as common, especially not during market downturns. So there are some limitations on the use of funds. Federal funds come with serious limitations, and state funds come with limitations. Restrictions at the federal level for the use of home and CDBG funds. Typically, I think in our analyses, we've seen that 99% of all home and CDBG funds go to rental projects, construction of rental projects. It's typically 60% of AMI or lower. You need to target special needs populations, such as elderly, single parent families, low-income minorities. You need to look at transitional housing, emergency shelter, and supportive housing projects. So there are very high levels of restrictions on the use of federal funds. There are also restrictions at the state level. So this is DOLA grants of state level entitlement funding, such as home and CDBG dollars that can be used, and the use of tax credits. 9% I've mentioned, and 4% at the typical AMI levels, but the local land use and locational considerations, the last bullet point on the right side, The State Qualifying Allocation Plan, or QAP, is published every single year by CHAFA, and it is a 100-plus page document that identifies the procedure for applying for and what CHAFA looks for in terms of receiving allocations for a development project. And just to take you through a little bit of what that is, that preference is given for those state resource projects, the tax credit projects, to those serving the lowest income, qualified tenants for the longest period of time, and they give preference to qualified census tracts also. That is a big consideration. They also score criteria on a number of other points. Market conditions must show strong demand or need for those units. There must be a readiness to proceed by the project. It must be financially feasible. The developer must have a track record of development. The project costs must be reasonable. They also must consider whether or not they are in proximity to other tax credit projects. There was a scare in the industry last year when a Supreme Court decision that came out of Texas identified that municipalities, development entities, and all other authorities responsible for affordable housing development needed to be cognizant of whether they were creating concentrations of poverty by allocating resources to single areas of the community. Came out of Texas. There were problems in Houston. Houston has been in trouble with HUD before, and so they kind of are a test bed for some of these things, whereas California is often our test bed in the country for whether or not land use policy is palatable or not. And then, of course, the site suitability is among those. So the takeaways from feasibility, and I want to make sure that I iterate that by going through this little overview of affordable project feasibility, I'm by no means suggesting that you do or don't need affordable projects of certain AMI levels. We simply wanted to present a little bit of an overview that was contextual to ordinary market rate development feasibility. So don't read too much into that little 5-slide overview. But basically, the feasibility takeaways are that project costs are really identical for both market rate and affordable projects. Risks are large and they are various depending on the market and depending on the conditions, and they're sometimes greater for affordable projects. Risks are obviously reflected in those required rate of returns because they do carry financial implications. Risks are generally not in anyone's control. You can't really control where the market is going. You can't control vacancies. You can't control rents. You can't control weather. You can't control really whether the site is contaminated or not because you didn't know about it. There are a lot of things that are really outside of one's control. There are things, though, planning process, approvals, and fees are in one's control. That's why typically when you talk about affordable projects or incenting any kind of a project, that fees, tax abatements, expedited review are typical among communities all over the country for considering in terms of incenting a project to move forward, to mitigate risks. So in terms of the market value of affordable rents on the affordable side are obviously insufficient to cover those costs and required returns. So the major focus is gap closure there. And that was why it requires a substantial commitment of resources. Obviously, the major resources have restrictions, and those restrictions limit a local community's ability to dictate what gets put there. So the concluding thought is, again, I've already mentioned this, but the main concluding thought is that in thinking about this in the context of policy development, if policy development is a question, is that all of these things really point to a mandate for local policy. because local policy is really where more flexibility enters into the equation. You have more control. You are able to more assuredly dictate what kind of needs are met, because you can immediately respond to those needs, and you have control over the resources. So it's essentially those who have control over the resources control what happens. So in these cases, federal resources have been the traditional resource for gap closure and affordable projects, and equity investors are typically have a lot of control in certain types of markets. For market rate projects, they're looking for a certain rate of return. That's why all the projects in downtown Denver are seeking the highest rents possible. I'm sure you might have read the Denver Post article on Sunday about one project around Union Station. I don't know about you, but I can't afford a $3,900 a month rent. But I guarantee that those equity investors are rubbing their hands together, just hoping that someone will come in and rent that. And guess what? They are. People are renting them. I really have no idea who they are, but anyway. I promised Nanette that I wouldn't digress too much in my spiel, but I do want to. I think it's important to think about those things in terms of where the resources are coming from and what control it allows those entities to have. So the second topic, the second part of this, so transitioning into a bit of the final supply-demand analysis conclusion. This is one of the questions I think we want to talk about in this narrative of how we're thinking about housing supply, how we're thinking about housing demand, where demands are coming from, how the city's supply is meeting those demands, what links that housing and that supply to economic development concerns. And trying to put it together where those kind of intersections exist, where and to what extent housing is needed. I also don't want to falsely set your expectations on that question. I don't have an answer for a number of housing that is needed. That's a bit more detailed than what we're prepared to present at the moment. And really, but just preparing the question, does the city need it? So first, what are businesses looking for when they're finding employees? There are a lot of different factors. You're probably familiar with IEDC. They have defined a series of, 13 points on what employers look for. They're looking at business and income tax levels. They're looking for labor availability. They're looking at energy costs, market size, quality of services. They're looking at other types of things in terms of development rate, environmental regulations, permitting, licensing, real estate costs and availability of real estate, infrastructure, access to financing and capital, and they're also looking for incentives. But the ones that we're focusing on here are essentially housing, quality of life, attractive living environment. But first, it's helpful to think, we are really fortunate in Colorado, and especially the MSA, to be located where we are, and Lakewood is obviously in a fortunate position to be even closer than Denver is to the mountains and to a lot of recreational opportunities. But the MSA is really, and Colorado, really known as a top performer nationwide, as supportive of innovation, entrepreneurship, and a growing tech sector. Those are summary points from a report from 2015 by IEDC, not IEDC, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, on how well Colorado's economy was functioning. So what employers then begin looking for in the market, they're looking for elements of growth, as it was indicated on that one bullet point 2 slides ago. Why are we often so concerned about consumption in the U.S.? Well, consumption represents 69% of the U.S. gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is about $18 trillion or $19 trillion in the first quarter of 2017, and personal consumption was about $13 trillion of that, so roughly 70%. So we're often very focused on that as a bellwether of growth in economy, as an opportunity for growth. So this map here shows per capita consumption expenditure in the state on an annual basis. So this is per consumer unit in each of the states, and Colorado is one of the darker shades of blue. It is among the highest in the U.S. The second one shows the rate of increase in each of the states, and Colorado is in that highest tier of the rate of increase of personal consumer expenditure. And personal consumer expenditure is all categories of expenditure: retail, shopping, dining, housing, and all the whole list. So this second one is looking at the growth in Lakewood's market. This is showing employment change between 2000 and 2015 for the city of Lakewood by industry. So as you're looking at this, the top line, the largest one, most of the growth in the city has been in healthcare and social assistance. Nearly 7,000 jobs have entered into the city from 2000 to 2015. Then there's a collection of other ones: educational services, accommodations, retail, professional, scientific, and technical services, and manufacturing have all grown by between 1,500 and 1,900 jobs each over that 15-year period. And then between the business services down to real estate, rental and leasing, there are positive increases between 7 jobs and 704 jobs over that 15-year time period. Arts, entertainment, and recreation, wholesale, IT, and finance and insurance have lost jobs over that period of time. I can tell you, because I've got a couple other points of comparison, fields like IT have lost in the metro area as a whole anyway. Lakewood is not alone in loss of IT jobs specifically for that in that area. So this is a little bit of a complicated chart, and I don't expect you to digest it all at once, so I broke it out into quadrants. The first quadrant, this is, first of all, what we're looking at is on the x-axis from negative 3,000 to positive 8,000 is total change in City of Lakewood employment. So all those numbers from the previous chart are plotted here by industry. And then the y-axis is a little more esoteric in that it is the change in the location quotient. So the location quotient, I know you will know what this means, and I know that others will know what this means, but it's essentially a measure of the proportion of jobs in that industry to the total for each of the geographies that are being analyzed. So in this case, the location quotient represents the number of jobs in each industry in Lakewood divided by the total number of jobs in Lakewood, all divided by then the same numbers for the metro area. So it's essentially like saying if your proportion of jobs in agriculture is 1% in Lakewood and the proportion in the metro area is 0.5%, the location quotient ends up being 2. So you would see a location quotient of 2. This represents the change in the location quotient. So it's effectively representing how much Lakewood's proportion of each industry has grown in excess of the growth in the proportion of the MSA's employment. I know it's a mouthful, but it's a metric to look at how much more that industry has been growing in Lakewood than in the MSA. Maybe not in absolute numbers, but in relative terms. So this first quadrant on the top right side indicates the best of both worlds. It is a positive increase in employment by industry, and it's also a positive change in the proportion of jobs. So healthcare social assistance has grown positively in absolute numbers, and it's also grown in larger proportion than the MSA. Same is true for manufacturing, agricultural, that number I gave you before was not absolute, but construction, utilities, and retail trade have also grown similarly. The second one is is a positive growth in the absolute numbers of those employment categories, but this means on the negative side of the change in the location quotient that the growth in those categories hasn't been as great proportionally to the MSA. So it's a good thing, but you potentially could think, well, we might be able to capture more, or could we capture more? Obviously, Nanette knows, and any economic developer knows that you're constantly fighting against a variety of different factors. There are locational factors, all those other factors that were in the slide previously. Now, this one, not to leave you with the worst of the worst, but this is where jobs have been lost, and also that industry has shrunk in proportion to the metro area industries. And then lonely here in the last quadrant is, although the number of jobs in information have decreased, Lakewood's proportion of information as a percent of total jobs has actually increased more than the metro area has. So where are employers finding this labor? This first graphic is, I should mention, that's incorrectly labeled as 2000. It should be 2002 when the data were first available. These data represent a partnership with the U.S. Census, the IRS, and the State Departments of Labor in identifying where people live and what type of job they hold in what location. So you can look at this in a variety of different ways. The conventional purpose for looking at this is to identify in and outflow of jobs. So in Lakewood here in 2002, public admin jobs. So this is showing a net import or net export of jobs by sector. And this doesn't necessarily mean that Lakewood is importing all of these jobs. It means that measured up against the job holders who live in the city of Lakewood, or who I should say lived in the city of Lakewood in 2002, down at the bottom, 5,400 of people who had jobs in the educational services sector were actually commuting out into the rest of the metro area to their jobs. And on the other end of the spectrum, it means that of all the people who held public admin jobs in the city of Lakewood, there was a net of 4,900 people commuting in to work jobs in public admin based on the distribution of jobs by sector. Now, by 2014, that profile has changed substantially. So in the same kind of characterization, Lakewood is effectively importing more labor in 2014 than it was in 2002. Public admin is importing 3,800 jobs. Retail is importing 2,300 jobs. Professional, scientific, and technical services is importing 2,100 jobs. And so on. You can go into healthcare and social assistance, admin, accommodation, and food services. And the rest are still exporting jobs by those industries. So the takeaway here is that the labor force participation rate in Lakewood is declining, meaning that of the population living here, there is a smaller percentage of people working in the labor force. Whether or not they're working in Lakewood or somewhere else is not really at issue. The issue is that as the population grows, which it has been growing, the labor force the number of jobs is still growing. In fact, the number of jobs has been growing faster than the population in the city, and we'll look at some of those numbers later as well. So, how does the city's supply of housing address these different spectrums of market segments, or does it match the needs? And what's the link between housing and economic development? The purpose of that is to really characterize what employers are looking for, and then what those workers are looking for in terms of, and in this case, housing. So a number of subordinate questions. What's the role of housing in economic development? What segments of the market are growing? Where is the demand coming from? what types of housing do these people want, what our work is looking for, and what portion of the city's housing inventory is optimally situated. So first of all, people are basically looking for adequate, safe, and affordable shelter. And top among all the considerations of what's important to people, as we looked at last time, and you've seen in your citizen survey, is sense of safety and security. That is the top priority for everybody. Privacy falls along, as about 40% important versus 70 to 80% importance of safety and security. Housing facilitates household mobility and changes through life stages as youngsters enter into couplehood and enter into familyhood. Their preferences, their interests in housing change, their interest in quality of life change, and then as people exit the workforce, those changes, those preferences change again and impact housing demand. But in terms of economic development, those 8 or so circles represent, again, those types of elements that are considered in economic development, 2 of which have to do with housing. So in terms of population growth, what growth is, what markets are growing, population of Lakewood in 2000, distributed by the different generation types, 81 to 2000 are the millennials, Gen Xers 65 to 80, boomers 46 to 64. Then there's 2015. I haven't changed the scale on the left side or anything to mislead you there. You've got an increase, obviously, of people born, children born 2001 or later. That really represents, as you can see in this next chart, the net change over time is that, and there are always misleading elements to every type of a chart. But I want to be forthright with this in terms of what this means for the distribution by age, as well as these generational things. So how can you have an increase in 24,414 children and have a decrease of people who would basically bear those children? You always have you always have people leaving to move somewhere else. You always have people coming in, and if you have households at a certain age leaving and you have a household with children of that age coming in, they get shown in terms of the children entering the population, whereas it may be a net decrease in the number of people who are, say, 35 to 54-year-old, which are family raising ages. So then you've got a net increase of millennials of about 10,000, and then net decreases the other way. Did have those stats on what that means in terms of percent of population. So if you just look at as straight under 35s, the under 35s were 47% of the population in 2000 and 46% of the population in 2015. So almost the same. 35 to 54-year-olds were 31% in 2000 and 25% in 2015. And when you look at this as a percent, then it's 55 and older is 22% in 2000 and 31% in 2015. So as a percent, this might lead you to believe, well, we're losing those 55 and older, which is not the case. You're not losing them. They're becoming a greater share of the population. It's just that in terms of net population gain, the net population gain is in the younger cohorts. You've seen this one before. I showed this one maybe 2 times ago. This is MSA employment by generation in 2005, 15, and the net change. 83% of all the new jobs that have been taken are in the millennial category. 45,000 of them are in the Gen X category. So what type of housing are people really looking for? We're trying to boil this down to what this means for certain age categories. Under 35s represent a majority of net employment growth. So for that question, what does that mean? What portion of the under 35s want certain types of housing? Looking for amenity-rich environments? The answer was 44% said it was really important to them to live in an amenity-rich environment. Short commute to work, 50% of them said it was very important. And 31% said it was really important to live in proximity to transit. So what does it mean for families? What portion of them prioritize types of, I've got the other answers to the same questions on another slide, but in terms of what portion of them are prioritizing the type of housing that Lakewood already has and the type of environment that Lakewood is looking for, 40% say it's extremely desirable, but when you add on to that the people who indicate that it is also right above or below on the scale of very, very desirable, then you start to add on massive numbers. When you add in the people who indicate on a scale of -5 to 5 that this type of housing is desirable, you get a number of about 85 to 90%, depending on which end of the scale. So this is a very desirable housing product for people. And obviously, as as some of the conversations we've had in the past have indicated, there's a reason why people moved here in the first place. And then you have the labor force participation rate declining and a greater portion of in-commuting. So there are also a number of people who are interested in aging in place. There are many people who are retiring, and it's clear by the data that people are retiring and they're staying here. They're not moving away. Some people are moving away, some people are not. Some people are moving out of their homes into smaller homes to downsize. They're looking for, in this case, wanted to indicate the lower maintenance living. 38% of people say age 55 and older are saying that it's very important to them that in the next 5 years, when they make their next move, that they have lower maintenance living. So it's important for us to understand, is there sufficient housing for that to meet their needs? So how well do these preferences align with the city's housing supply? We'll kind of get to that, but first I want to show you just a parallel of these profiles. So what their current stated preferences are on the left side, and the right side is the breakdown by age category. So the first number is always going to be under 35s. The second number is always the 35 to 54-year-olds, and the third number is always 55 or older. I just want to highlight a couple interesting trends. One, what's more important to people, home size or neighborhood? Everybody's almost unanimous about, we think the neighborhood is really, really one of the driving factors in considering where to live. Would you like to drive to schools, stores, restaurants, and live in a larger home and a larger lot? The indication is a general increase over the age categories from youngest to oldest. Would you like to walk to places and live in a smaller home? Again, the reverse correlation. Most youngsters want to live in a smaller home and a smaller lot, not as concerned with privacy, not as concerned with safety and security just yet, and want to live in kind of in the midst of it all. Sense of safety and security, I indicated again previously that generally fluctuated between 70 and 80%. Obviously, there's that upward increase in that, but still is really kind of the highest of all of them. Second highest, walking distance to shops is very important, but you can see that declining slope where it becomes decreasingly important the older you get to have that trendy hipster attitude of walking to shops and the local brew pub. Sense of privacy is very important. This one also increases with age. Quality of schools is very important. That kind of increases obviously to the families and then decreases. Interestingly enough, when you look at the under 35 responses now and ask them how important quality of schools is going to be in 5 years, that number really increases. It's very interesting about people considering where they're going to be in 5 years. Walking distance to rail stations, that one again is sort of a decrease, but it still is a third who think that it's very important. So, I forgot the last one. Lower maintenance living. That one increases just up at the 55 and older. I don't have an explanation for the 14% other than lower maintenance living is perhaps laziness. I don't know. Sufficient supply. No, yeah, I had to get in that jab just once. Okay, so what portion of the city's housing is placed to meet these demands? This is a bit of the visual analysis. The next 5 slides are a visualization of 5 of the key amenities that we're looking at and that we asked people about in the survey. So these represent the location of employment centers, and I calculated what percent of the housing stock is currently within a half a mile, or basically traditional walking distance of these employment centers. 34% of the housing stock, and 50% of people want a short commute to work. That doesn't necessarily they want to live in walking distance, but people really predominantly want a short commute to work. When you ask people whether they really want to walk or bike to work, that is a pretty high percentage of people. These are, again, stated preferences. They're aspirational. It's not scientific, but these are stated preferences. Walking distance to existing retail centers or areas of what we could call retail redevelopment potential. Not all these are the same types of retail centers. This is a severely limited data source because we wanted some ideal and perfectly categorized data, but we couldn't get it. These are CoStar designations of retail centers. So obviously you see you've got Colorado Mills, Belmar on there. At the same time, you've got West Colfax Retail and Westland Town Center on there, and Walmart and Costco are showing up down in the south as well. Obviously, they're not all the same types. They're not all the same sizes. They're not all the same quality either, or with a variety. The ideal analysis would really look at what we're looking for, walking distance to neighborhood retail, where it's a collection of shops and restaurants that aren't a massive thing, that are really auto-centered. Nevertheless, we're looking at, in these areas, about 18% of the housing stock, and 30% of people stating that it would be very important to live in walking distance of a retail center. Walking distance to grocery stores, 28% of the housing stock. This one aligns really remarkably well. 30% said it was very important to them. Walking distance to restaurants. Again, this analysis is complicated by the fact that we've got a variety of different restaurants. This includes things like Applebee's and Casa Bonita and Pho 1 through 10,000 and everything else. 69% of the housing stock is within these areas. Now, this one I almost want to throw out because it has so much, like the retail, it has so much variation in quality, size, quantity. But 30% of people state that it would be very important to live within walking distance of a nice restaurant. Rail stations, here we go. 12% of the housing stock is within a walking distance of rail stations. 24% of the people say it would be very important to be in walking distance. 29% said they'll be they would be very important. That's really bad grammar. It'll be very important to them in 5 years. And in terms of market premium, 13% of people surveyed would be willing to pay 10% more in housing to be in walking distance of rail station. So what does this mean for putting it together? And I'll try to put it together in 5 minutes. So we've got a series of questions here, and a series of overlapping maps. So here I've overlaid both the retail and restaurants so that we're showing an overlap or an intersection of areas where the retail and restaurants exist. In those areas, those 6 designations, there's 17% of housing stock. And 33. When we ask people about living in walking distance to shops and dining and restaurants, 33% said that it would be very important to them in their next move. 15% are very willing to pay 10% more in their housing to accomplish that, and 12% of them said they would be willing to pay 20% more in housing. So this is kind of what we would associate as the activity center premium, or if we think about these in terms of transit-oriented development for other considerations, it's the TOD premium, which some people refer to. So where are the attractive areas for retail, employment, and grocery? Those are in these areas where there's about 9% of the housing stock, and 21% said it would be very important to live in those types of areas. Again, same types of market premium that are stated. So I do want to mention that this aligns very interestingly with your comprehensive plan. Your comprehensive plan, on the which is those series of shaded areas on the left side of the slide, indicate the areas of focus, and they're really interestingly aligned with the areas that we've identified through our analysis. For the sake of disclosure, I didn't get that layer of data on the left side until after I had done this other analysis. So I did not use your comprehensive plan to drive or dictate how I was going to make this other determination. So if the city does grow, this is really kind of at the root of this is really a question of meeting demands, and meeting demands means growing to meet those demands often, or it means maybe through attrition, allowing natural sort of cycle of household replacement and people moving out in a way to make supply available. But the metro area is really growing quite substantially. So I know key among the concerns really are how to maintain market balance. And I want to think about what this market balance means for Lakewood. How do you maintain it? We want to have the discussion should revolve not just around the new residents. This discussion is really not just about millennials. It's not just about families. It's not just about those aging in place. It's about current residents and future residents. The top priority we shouldn't disregard is sense of safety and security, and a lot of what Lakewood's housing supply provides is that. And there are also those other subordinate priorities that need to be met to ensure that kind of sense of community in place. Proximity to shops, restaurants, privacy, quality schools, proximity to rail station. So I think, what does this mean for Lakewood? It's maybe more like evolving and adapting instead of thinking about it in terms of growth. That's just my suggestion, not anything that needs to be dictated. But we do need to keep in mind, it's important to understand where we are in the regional economy. There are a lot of revitalization pressures that the MSA is experiencing. There is strong economic growth that is a driver behind growth in not just the central part or the core in Denver, but also in the first-ring communities. First-ring communities being Aurora, Lakewood, Wheat Ridge, Arvada, second-ring communities, et cetera. So there is this the second piece of this is that people have these trade-offs that they make decisions about where to live based on sense of community versus cost, or the type of neighborhood and its proximities. Households are willing to pay, and some of the stated preferences indicate that there is strong willingness to pay. Although, small percentages, 15 to 12% paying 10 and 20% more than what they are anticipating paying. But that's a trade-off that people are making. And we can't disregard the impact that millennials are having on dictating where the market is going. And mobility with a $1 billion investment in the West Line, for example. That is a significant piece of transportation infrastructure that is attractive, that makes first-ring communities very attractive to people looking to find housing. So in terms of the takeaways, and this is the last real slide here. The population of Lakewood has been growing, and it's obviously because well, I should start out with the MSA. The MSA is growing because we have a very attractive living environment. We have a high quality of life, and there are a lot of recreational opportunities, and because of it, the jobs base is growing, and so we also have. We have the benefiting communities being primarily Denver, and secondarily, that is spilling out into those first-ring communities. But in Lakewood, we have this dichotomy of trajectories where the population has grown by about 10,000 over the last 15 years, and that's really only been in the last 5 years that it's grown by 10,000. Employment growth has grown by 20,000 jobs in that same time frame, so about twice the rate of population growth. So Lakewood is essentially importing more labor over time, and so the question becomes, how do you meet growing demands from your own labor force, your own jobs, in terms of that housing? Some people choose to live where they do. many people want to be in downtown Denver and pay that $3,900 a month. But some people don't, and it's really a question of where Lakewood wants to be in terms of economic development, in terms of attracting those types of jobs. For instance, under 35s account for a large percent of the tech workforce, and the tech workforce is one of those categories of industries that is growing and that Colorado and the MSA are seeking to grow. The question is, do you also commensurately make product and housing supply available that attracts those workers if you're also going to be attracting those jobs? So the age level considerations extend beyond just the millennials for the population, but also for those exiting the labor force. Or those in the labor force and looking for the traditional single-family detached housing. So there are these housing supply constraints and limitations that we've looked at geographically and that we've looked at in terms of what people are looking for. And I know this is not a comprehensive assessment of the survey work and the other analysis that we've done, but it is some kind of an indication of that type of market pressure. So where do we go from here? I certainly first want to mention I hope that some of this analysis and some of what we've discussed has been helpful, at least in the smallest amount, to all of you in thinking about how you can, in being helpful in figuring out or strategizing and formulating ways that you can be the most effective governing body that you can be. I think that we'll have one or two more conversations that are more policy oriented in the future, but the question then will become, what type of policy orientation do you take? Do you take the role of the active and engaged participant? Do you take the role of a mindful but restrained facilitator of the city's development and what that development looks like? So that's the end of this presentation, and we're available to answer all of your questions.
Well, very well done. I think that was a lot of information as always. And two things I just want to make sure that we can, I know that Ms. Nealon is developing a web page, and we're going to make sure that all of these presentations and all this information is going to be on there, as well as a report or a draft report before it's finalized, because I think for some, including me, love to have some more time to, take it all in and absorb it. So thank you very much. I'm going to hold off on any questions, and we have quite a few questions. So I want to make sure at this point that we stick with those, if we could, before we go to any sort of comments or things like that. So Councilor Wickman, you lit up first.
Thank you. It was a great little marketing study and Development 101. But in it, as much as this is supposed to be a housing study, I was wondering if I could switch gears and ask some housing questions. So first question is, what's our record been over the last 5 years on the amount of housing that we have brought in the last 5 years? And if you can break it down by year, and I'd also like to get it broken down by single family versus multifamily.
And I think we actually have that in the comp plan from 2015, but do you have anything that's newer?
We have, that's a good question. I presented that data, I think, in our first session, and I don't believe that I have those numbers with me at the moment. There have been, I do remember that in the last year of permitting activity, 2015, there were, approximately 1,400 units permitted or something like that. So there was a considerable magnitude, and there has been a considerable upswing in development activity over the last 5 years. I'll have to punt on that one, but it's in a previous presentation to you.
Okay. I wonder if you could explain to me a little dichotomy here. In last week's presentation, we were told that the waiting list for people trying to get into West Metro housing fell in 1 year from 200 to 150. And so I'm wondering, why is the waiting list dropping if affordability is such an issue? And 150 doesn't strike me an awful lot. So can somebody explain that dynamic?
And I thought the just for clarification, which meeting? I thought the waiting list was in the thousands.
That's not what they said last week.
Last
7 days
week at
the sustainability report. Well, I have it with me. If you give me a few minutes, I can look it up. But anyway, like I said, I wrote that down, and that was what was up on the slide. Was a drop from 200 to 150, 25% drop they were claiming. It was one of the great things we're doing. Yay.
You know what I'd like to do? Metro West Housing is the one that has the best numbers of their waiting list. Last I knew it was up in the 5,000 range, but let us follow up and ask that question and get that back to you.
Okay. The businesses that we've lost because we didn't have affordable housing and stuff like that. How many of these businesses have we lost so far, and how many jobs was that we've lost?
I don't think that was mentioned.
Well, one of the things is we need affordable housing in order to attract businesses. And it's like, if we need to do it, then you seem to be implying that we're not attracting outside business. And is that the case? Are we not attracting business because we don't have sufficient housing?
No, maybe a clarification on that is the number of jobs in the city of Lakewood has grown from about 57,000 in 2001, 2002 to about 78,000 in 2015. So there's been a net gain of 20,000 jobs in the city. The data that I presented was commuting by industry, and that by no stretch indicates that there have really been a loss of those jobs indicated in that data. There were, however, a handful of industries that have lost some jobs, and maybe about five industries, but that hasn't been that's not a really substantial number.
And how much is that because of our housing stocks not adequate?
Well, you could look at that from an affordability standpoint, but some of those jobs were in finance and insurance and in IT, which generally have higher wages. So it wouldn't have been because of affordability.
Okay, well, that's my questions for now.
Councilor Gutwein.
Thank you. So I actually just rewatched the first presentation right before this meeting, and just wanted to say the answer to your question, Councilor Wickman, is in the first 10 minutes of the first presentation that we had about what our housing stock is in various types of housing. So while that was an amazing presentation, I'll probably watch this one multiple times to be able to digest all of that. My first question is, at the end of your presentation, you said something about evolve and adapt instead of grow. Could you explain more about what you mean in that? I think it was one of your very last slides in terms of looking at policy and housing solutions.
Well, I might look to my colleague to also answer that question. I was frankly placing that there, thinking that that you could define what that means for you. It's not, I think, my place to define what that means for you. But I offer that up as an alternative characterization of I think what direction the city is going in.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, then my second question is, you showed us a bunch of different metrics and ways of looking at this, like that we're a top performer in the nation, our MSA in terms of growing tech and inertia, and that our personal consumption is growing. We've seen slides about population growth. Does all of the data that you've looked at indicate that we will continue to see population growth in the Denver Metro MSA?
The short answer to that is yes.
Okay.
We should expect growth in the Denver MSA.
Okay. And I guess the follow-up question to that is, if we're expecting growth in the Denver MSA and we don't accommodate that growth or plan for that growth, what kind of impacts would we see in our community for our existing residents? Maybe, and that may be a policy question for all of us to think about in terms of if we don't accommodate our growth, how is that going to impact our residents in terms of affordability and traffic?
In terms of housing supply, just straight housing supply, when supply is constrained for any variety of reasons, either artificial or natural, artificial being an urban growth boundary, for example, Davis, California, Boulder, Portland. Obviously, when you're artificially constraining your supply of land and therefore ability to build housing, that increases the pressure on prices. So prices increase. All the other elements of impacts of slower growth or limited growth can sometimes be sales taxes. Where looking at Bureau of Labor Statistics data on consumer expenditures, the older a consumer gets, the more they are on fixed income and less likely to spend. By many accounts, there are sometimes opposing viewpoints on what the future of baby boomer expenditures are going to be when they enter full retirement. But many will be spending in research that we've seen. Many are likely to be spending their money on experiential purchases rather than ordinary retail items, which don't have local sales tax implications for communities in Colorado which are dependent on sales taxes. Schools are obviously impacted as well. The fewer children there are, the more school closures there would need to be. And there are a variety of other impacts that can be identified.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. And so just to make sure I have that understanding correct, if there was some kind of artificial or any other reason a supply constraint on our housing, we would experience an increase, or likely would be an increase in housing costs. And then also, because we have an aging population and a growing population of baby boomers, we would also potentially see a decrease in our sales tax base revenue as a city. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, last one, and then I'll pass this on to my colleagues here. So I was wondering if we could go back to one of the slides where you show that we're importing labor. Sorry to make you get up there. Thank you. And I think you had one towards the end.
That's
okay.
2002 and then 2014.
Awesome. Okay, that should work. Thank you.
First one or the second one?
Maybe the second one, since it's more recent. So basically, we're importing more labor than our housing supply has increased. So we have a lot of people driving into Lakewood to work. Okay, so one of our main concerns in resident concerns is traffic. So what I want to understand is how is this affecting our traffic? I guess maybe that's obvious that we're getting traffic from people moving in, but and then, you know, what could be done to mitigate that? Is that if we had housing next to those jobs, we would essentially lose the traffic from people commuting in. Is that fair to say? Am I understanding this correctly?
Maybe some other people have some ideas too, but this would be maybe a question for transportation experts as well. My thought is, looking at this chart which we've put up here, I think anecdotally at best, there are a lot of public admin jobs commuting in. They could very well be commuting in on the West Line, for example. Although they may be commuting in on 6 as well. And come to think of it, when was the West Line opened? 2013. It's possible. It's possible they could be those jobs could be commuting in on transit already. It's possible they could also be commuting in on the highway. But that's really difficult without that kind of data specifically.
Okay, so so we can't say how they're getting here. They could be already using public transit. So we can't say based on this that this is contributing to our traffic.
We can't say definitively that this.
Okay.
But there's DRCOG modeling, and DRCOG modeling can differentiate the type of trips that are happening by proximity and length of trip.
Okay.
So that's something that has a detailed analysis that's possible through the modeling process.
Great. So that would be really helpful, I think, if we could get that information to see how much of these, how they're commuting. And if it's by car, then I think it would be fair to say that that's contributing to our traffic. And if it's not, then that's great. We have a different traffic problem. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I have Mayor Pro Tem Harrison and Councilor Abel, Shakti, Franks, Vincent, and then back to Councilor Wickman.
I want to follow up on where Dana was going just a minute ago. If you had those additional 10,000 people that are coming into Lakewood for working purposes, do we know that if they do or do not want to live in the city of Lakewood, is that even possibly?
That's frequently a question that we put on a survey, and I can't recall off the top of my head whether we asked them that specific question in this one. We did ask them a question about where they would like to live if they are not living in this area. I don't have that number on the top of my head. I will get that, but we find that it's that obviously not everybody who is working in the city wants also to live in the city. That is true for every single job market.
Well, and I would think that probably that's everywhere, because if I work here and my husband works elsewhere, we might decide to live in a different. So that definitely makes sense. You said you used the word maintenance in several of the slides. Can you define what you're meaning by maintenance? Are you talking about painting, mowing the lawn? Are you talking about, is that what when you define maintenance, that's what you're talking about?
When we ask that question, it is lower maintenance is defined as taking care of the yard, and snow removal, and those types of activities that are ordinarily a part of
home ownership.
Home ownership.
Single family dwellings. Okay.
Correct.
And then the other question is, I didn't see it. Maybe you talked about it and I didn't see it, but did you ask the question to different age brackets what type of housing they preferred, i.e., did young people want to see a townhouse or an apartment? Did empty nesters, did you ask that question?
We did ask that question. I think in our second presentation, I showed a series of images of different types of housing and what the preferences were by age category. It generally showed that the younger ages were more interested in the higher density product, but still the highest preferences were always to the traditional single family, small single family, and townhomes to some extent. But younger ages were always more interested in those higher density products than the older ages were.
And in that higher density product, did we break it down to true ownership, like a condo, a townhouse versus an apartment?
No, we did not break it out. It was just a visual preference question.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Abel.
The question about affordability. We've added, let's see, in 2014, according to a chart we got today, we added 1,009 multifamily residences. Most of them are 250 to 300 unit apartment buildings. If most of our construction is going to apartments, wouldn't that also raise the price of family ownership or ownership homes? If we don't build more ownership homes, and you've already told us a couple of meetings ago that single family residences are the most in demand and the least in supply, but then some multifamily residences have townhomes and such. But it seems that most of our multifamily and most of our new housing units are going to rentals. So that decreases the supply of home ownership. Wouldn't that also raise the price of home ownership?
Yes.
Significantly.
Yeah.
Thank
if
you.
I can take any credit for that revelation, that's
Oh, no, it just...
that's exactly right. That's one of the factors.
Sure, it's common sense. I just wanted to bring that out, that that less growth is not the only factor growth is not the only factor in the price of homes, home affordability. You were talking about trends, people who like to walk to the rail station or want to live close to the rail station, people that want to live within walking distance to a restaurant, people that want to live within the walking distance to other amenities. I noticed those numbers were 31%, 28%, 30%, 24%. Did you get them at 12%, in fact, for one? Did any of those categories produce a majority? I mean, we're talking 1 in 5 people want to live close to some of these things. So was there anything that proved that it was a true attraction for a majority of people, or was it all broken down into the 18 to 30%, 40% range?
They were all broken down into those
smaller numbers,
portions of the numbers. They're not surprising numbers to me.
No, but
I would be shocked if some of those numbers came in at majorities.
I understand, but it also, I think, illustrates the difficulty of hitting a really wide market with a single product or a single amenity. Did you look into home buyers versus home rental demand? Was there any percentage? Did you ask about that? How many of you want to buy and how many of you want to rent?
We asked people in their next move whether, if they are renting now, whether they're going to be buying. If they're renting now, are they going to be renting again? And in some cases, if they're owning now, are they going to be renting in the future, or are they going to be still owning when they move to their next location? We did ask that question.
And?
You might be able to find that if you give me a minute to find my summary.
If it's going to take a while, maybe we can hit it in the next session.
We'll get the number to you later. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You said most folks want to live in a neighborhood, or their emphasis is on a neighborhood. We did get a majority there. Is that a traditional neighborhood? Is it a neighborhood that's a high-rise, or did we differentiate? I mean, what do you mean by a neighborhood?
Yeah, I think you might have asked a question that was around that question when I presented it before. it's not a trick question, but it's an intentional dichotomy to force people to make a choice between whether or not home size is important or whether the neighborhood is important. It's neighborhood is a subjective term, and people take it in different ways. The question is simply to mirror other research that has been done by the National Association of Home Builders as a point of alignment, really.
Okay. So it could be people were talking about their apartment building as a neighborhood, or some other folks talking about their spacious lots, large home neighborhood.
That's
and
right.
Others about their smaller, tinier lot neighborhoods. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Shakti.
Just to clarify, people could pick that they felt very strongly about a whole bunch of things, or were they limited to a certain number? So about the question of why are we seeing the low percentages, could I say I feel very strongly about every category?
You could say you feel very
Okay.
strongly, and some people, and obviously some. If you look at individual responses, some people said it was very important consistently down the line. Some people said, there were gradations of I think 4 or 5 where it was very important, moderately important, neutral, not very important, and not at all important. Those are the categories for, and people would answer questions individually for all those different aspects.
So a bunch of different questions. I'm a little confused about how if you build apartments, that makes the value of the single-family homes go up. And so my question is, are you saying that the relative value would go up or the absolute value would go up?
Well, it's a bit of a supply and demand and price quantity type of a relationship, where if the demand for housing goes up to, let's quantify it at 2,000 units at a certain price, if only 500 of those units are ownership housing and 1,500 are apartments, but there's demand for 1,500 ownership units and 500 apartments because those 1,500 people want to buy a unit, that means three households are competing and bidding up the price of one ownership house available. That is, considering that if the stock of housing has just increased by only 500 ownership units and 1,500 apartment units. In a theoretical context, that's what happens.
So if you had no increase in apartments and no increase in single-family homes, it seems like then the pressure on the price of the single-family home would go up much more. That because there's some people who would be willing to live in either an apartment or a single family home, and they switch between them based on the prices.
Another data.
That was a question. Is that true?
Well, I think yes. Anecdotally, you can see proof in that if there are not ownership opportunities available for people moving in, they want to be in this area, which that has been the story of the Denver metro area for many years now. They're going to rent until a home becomes available. And so when that home becomes available, they, among other households, are going to be bidding on the price of that, which is going to go up.
So I guess my question is, if you have a market where there's no additional apartments, and would the price of a single family home be higher in a market where there's no additional housing of any sort, or in a market where there's an additional apartments but not single family homes?
Anywhere where you increase the supply, it takes the pressure off of demand and the price.
So even if the new buildings were apartments, you would expect that the price of single-family homes would go down?
Go down because you're taking part of the demand out of that. Councilman Abel's observation is correct, and that observation is also correct.
Can you help me understand how they're both correct?
So even if the supply, it depends on how much. In both of these cases, we need to define the amount of demand. If in the case of 500 additional apartment units entering a market, and there are, let's say, 2,000 demand units, yes, that's going to increase the cost of ownership housing for the housing that is available. If, in a typical market in Lakewood, about 7% of the housing supply turns over every single year, meaning that in a typical year, there are approximately 7% of all the 65,000 plus or minus housing units in the city that go up for sale. So that is the supply in a constrained supply or constrained economy like you're describing, where there is no increase in either one of the tenure of product. Still, 7% of the supply of housing is coming available. Those housing prices are going to be bid up in the case even if apartments come online. They're also going to be bid up even more if no apartments come online.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so the whole thing of so traffic and living near where you work, and if people had the opportunity to live near where they worked, would that maybe reduce traffic? And I think it gets quite complex in that it wouldn't just be anywhere, it would need to be near where people were working. They would also need to want to move there, which goes to Karen's question about do people want to move to Lakewood. I think we asked the question, do you want to live near where you work? Does that sound right? So we didn't say, do you want to live in Lakewood, but we said, do you want to live near where you work? And some pretty high percentage said yes. The site that, so I think the Federal Center and the hospital are the two obvious places where we would see a lot of commuting. And so it'd be the roads near there where commuting might have a big impact. Would just make sense to me. Okay. And then one more, this is on the affordable housing. And I've had this conversation and still don't totally understand it. I think that there's some kind of an incentive based on the federal tax credit structure. It's hard to mix market rate with affordable housing in a unit. Do you understand if that's true or why that's true? And also what, if anything, we could do to promote mixed use, affordable and market rate in when they're building, they build them together.
Well, that's a pretty complicated question. The part of that answer is dependent on the conversation we had about the restrictions and limitations on the use of or the sources of funding. So if the source of funding for a part of the project's costs is coming from a restricted source, such as federal funding or the tax credit structure, mixing in truly market rate units is impossible, because they have to be the units would have to be condominiumized off. The ownership structure would have to be separated, because the equity investor is taking a partial ownership, or the city is taking partial ownership, like 1% of 1%, or 1/10 of 1% ownership, whereas say a housing authority is taking a greater share of the ownership, like 99%. The market rate units could not be owned by the same structure. I mean, by the same owner. So in mixing the sources, in making sources available for that type of development, you would have to change. making that type of development available, you would have to change the source itself. So you'd have to either make it an entirely local source and say, for example, some communities take the approach of, well, if we want to try to do that, let's throw local resources at buying down some number of units just in that development, such that they are affordable to a certain household income level, and the remainder are market rate. But that still has challenges for say rental in the state of Colorado that would be construed as potentially rent control. That's prohibited in the state. And Boulder has a legal workaround that essentially, with the Telluride decision and with, the lawyer can answer the questions more specifically, but with the other Senate bill clarification from several years ago, a housing authority or like entity can have ownership of that. But when Boulder tries to do it, developers can't work out how to separate the ownership structure, even with that legal workaround. In a rental situation, it's almost impossible for the state of Colorado to do that.
Thank you.
Councilor Franks.
I actually don't have any questions. I just want to reiterate a couple things that I said last time as we get closer to kind of getting to the policy discussion. Where my interest more lies, now I live in a single family residence because that's my choice, but I'm also becoming more and more interested in facilities that are mixed demographics, how green projects. I guess I want to start to understand what kind of drivers, what kind of folks will we attract for things that are more unique. I know we keep talking about condos and townhomes and apartments and single family, but for me, that really doesn't start to push the more kind of creative aspect of trying to create a different space. So I'm just going to list them out. I mean, I think green projects, how many people want to live over retail? I think that there's certain market for that. Also, multi-generational. I've seen a lot of communities where homes with a carriage home, so you're starting to accommodate, multiple generations, which can reduce some of the density, but yet get some real creative living spaces for folks. Living where there's common shared spaces, larger kitchens, more communal areas. Food producing centric living, activity centric, rooftop gardening. I'm just more interested in things rather than the same old. I'm just real interested in what can we do to really drive some vibrancy and put something in a place where the density's appropriate, the height's appropriate, and it draws in that level of interest and recognition that we're filling niches. So that's really, it's not that I'm asking a question tonight, but I'm more interested in kind of those types of things rather than just another 400-unit apartment complex that I get complaints about day over day, week over week, that are so close to the road, don't have enough parking associated with them. And I'm also interested in maybe finding out through this how many people expect to still drive, because we seem to be putting in units where we don't have enough parking for the residents alone, let alone the visitors, and then people of a certain age that require maybe support services, vehicles that need to be dropped off, for oxygen. So I guess I'm just kind of digging a slightly deeper direction, and I think that fits more in the policy than obviously something we've done tonight, but I want to make sure that that's somehow included where we get that richness of that experience before we start talking too much policy. So just a lot of comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
If I can just mention, I think that's actually great, because that's along Councilman Gutwein. That's exactly what I was envisioning throwing out those ideas like evolve and adapt. I think that's more along characteristics of thinking of how the city evolves and adapts to its needs. So thank you for those suggestions.
Councilor Vincent.
I have a question around the affordable housing too. And most of that's around the tax increment, the 9%. Did I understand you to say that there was an issue of proximity in a Houston decision?
That was an issue of concentration of poverty.
Correct. Yes. Can you tell me what the parameters were of that? Could you give me some additional information regarding that issue?
I'll have to follow up on that one. I don't have the specifics of that of that case or that issue in Texas.
Okay.
I know the generalities.
Of it, and then they were concerned about undue concentration, correct?
Right. Well, the Houston has had a lot of experience with HUD.
Yeah.
And their funding. They receive a massive amount of entitlement funds every year, and so HUD has a serious interest in ensuring that it is used according to federal policy on housing and resources. And they have historically had racial segregation issues, and it's predominantly a race issue for Houston. But it's land availability and cheap land that is available for that, and that's where money had been poured quite extensively for a considerable amount of time.
Okay. So how do you get around that issue? Because here's what I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong. You have affordable housing, so it's 30% or 60% of the AMI, correct? Okay, so you have this complex that's there. Then someone's coming in and trying to assess where the greatest need is for affordable housing. So you have a population that's already in affordable housing, which is bringing down the average income. Therefore, when they look at that same area would qualify for these tax credits because they're already underneath the average income. Then you get another one. I mean, aren't you going to have undue concentration in some form or fashion by the assessment and the rules that have been set up?
There's two dynamics going on.
Okay.
So I think David showed the sources of funds, and the answer to your question is yes. And what happens is there's a bonus if the developer that applies for the tax credit project, they almost always apply when you're in a qualified census tract, because they get additional leverage of their tax credit on the market. I think, I can't remember if they get a 30% increase. That's why you only see it in our qualified census tracts. And that's where CHAFA sees the need there. So some of the policies that you may want to look at is where do you incentivize that? Because if you remember in the model that he provided for the affordable housing is a component has a local component to that. Do you supply with the CDBG? Do you supply with home funds? Because you're in the approval process of how we expend those funds. So you can control that to some extent. Those only get to be used in qualified census tracts, but you may use it for something that's non-housing. So you have competing goals going on right now. You have a population that needs housing. You have a source coming from CHAFA that does the alignment on the need and determines who gets the tax credit projects. And that's where you can influence some of the outcome by allocating where you put your CDBG and home dollars. So then if you're feeling an area is concentrated, that may be where you choose not to use local funding or some of those revenue streams going towards it. Does that help you?
Yes, it does, because I can't understand how you'd ever get out of that kind of quagmire. I mean, if you're trying to develop areas, you get monies for affordable housing, then that still lowers the income. Then you don't have people coming in with businesses. You have certain types of businesses for that population. So unless you do something, by default, it's going to end up being clearly a lower census tract every time.
And that's going to be some big policy questions. And some of our communities around us have had those big policy questions. So you may want to relax on that dependency of the low-income housing tax credits and create some other strategies that disperse affordable housing in the rest of in the city. So you get we've talked about this, a balance of housing in each of the communities, a different balance. It won't always be the same across the city, but there may be other strategies that we can come forward with, like a checklist for you to consider and say, is this reasonable, and talk about those pros and cons.
So that would be part of the policy issue?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And to build off that, Ms. Vincent, is, sometimes you need those opportunities or that 9% to get somebody the first in, as exampled in Two Creeks with Metro West. And then you have a market rate come in after that, so you start to build yourself out of that. But you're absolutely right. That's a great policy discussion to have to make sure we're not having undue concentrations in certain areas. Yep. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. David, your presentation was excellent as always, and can we get a copy, hard copy of your slides? I'd just like to build off something that Councilman Frank said, Councilwoman Franks, regarding different products. Patio homes, I think, should be part of that mix. As seniors want to leave their homes with high maintenance, there's an increase in security living closer to other folks as well. And I think a patio home product would be very welcome in this city for those folks. Also, please understand the context of my comments in that they're probably more specific for Ward 1 and Ward 2, since we have the light rail, and there's always been so much talk of the transit-oriented development. It's the older part of Lakewood, home ownership with large lots, and because of that, and because of the TOD mentality, there seems to be a thought that that's the right place to have very high density, concentrated, high profile, and you're seeing more of that thought, more of that pattern down a particular corridor within Lakewood. And I understand that and I get it. But also, I think you reach a tipping point when you have so many apartment units versus homeownership, that you lose a certain ownership in the neighborhood of folks that are naturally more transient. They're going to get married, they're going to have children, they're going to move on. They don't have that same buy-in to the community. That's, for me, that's something I think needs to be part of the puzzle here. And also in Ward 1 and Ward 2, where by your slides it shows that's one of the areas to look at for increased density. It also has the least amount of open space, and that also needs to be part of the equation. You start putting people in high density together, and the reality is humans like space around them. It increases police calls. That also needs to be on the table. And definitely in Wards 1 and Wards 2, we've got schools that are struggling anyway, to be honest with you. Iber and Mulholm. Sharon's familiar with that, so is Scott. You add high-density apartment living, and the schools that are already in place are being impacted in a way that I think we need to make sure that we're sensitive to what we're doing there. Anytime you have this high concentration, high density, high profile, it affects the stormwater flows. I mean, there's real things that we need to look at, the way that we're going to be impacting some areas of Lakewood, thinking that because the light rail is there, that's the prime target for all of this. And I would just like us, when the time comes for policy, that we take a look at some of these things and how we're impacting some well-established neighborhoods. No questions.
And quick question, you may have touched on this in one of our earlier presentations. Do we have any data on how many folks move from an apartment or move to Lakewood and then end up, moving on to buy a house? I think a lot of folks who are just starting out, or people that I talk to, lived in an apartment sometime along their path or their journey. So I was curious if we have any of that type of information or data. Councilor Roybal, and then I'll go to the second round of Councilor Wickman, then Gutwein.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, some of the questions that are out there, in our ward, we have so much diversity. We have everything from multi-million-dollar homes to modular homes to horse property to Balmar to regular, housing in the area. And a lot of the comments that I'm getting back, and Councilor Johnson kind of alluded to this, our community was built back in the 50s, 60s, and our infrastructure needs a lot of love. And I'd like to see something kind of addressing that, kind of seeing what the needs are. For example, the demand for more water, the demand for more sewer lines, updating the gas lines, electricity lines. We're having updates now on fiber optics, which is great. But when we get such a demand and we get high density housing put into our area, then it's going to create a big demand on a lot of things. The other stuff that I looked at was the structure, like the high schools, the elementary schools, the grocery stores. We only have 3 in our ward, and the demand is getting even more and more. One of the stores, they can't even keep, they bring out pallets upon pallets of food. They stock the shelves that morning, that afternoon they're empty, and they're restocking it over again. So I'd like to see, something kind of describing that, see what the need is in the community, and how we can, rise to the occasion to see what we need to do to accommodate that. And that's what I call the infrastructure of our community. But I'd like to see if you can, see if what you would recommend on what we need to do to be able to start addressing some of those things. Special districts, same thing. We have several different special districts, and they've been around for a long, long time. And now the needs, when these utilities are now beyond their lifespan, now we're having to address it. So those are some of the needs that we have in our community, but I wanted you to be aware of that. And maybe we can help, bring that forward so we can, actually grow in population.
I'm going to posit that, that's an important component in your policy development. It is not something that we've paid EPS to do that analysis on. So we'll have to talk internally on how we can bring that forward in a way that could influence your policy discussion on the housing component of it.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Wickman.
Let me start off by reiterating those numbers that I threw out earlier. I did get out the sustainability, and on page 58, it does indicate that the waiting list for Metro West housing dropped from 200 in 2015 to 150 in 2016, a 25% drop. Now, 2 questions.
Can I give a clarification, Mr. Wickman? I got an email while I was here that they actually have a demand for 3,800, and they limited the waiting list to 150. So there's a difference between demand and what they put on the waiting list.
Okay, question. On the memo that was sent out for tonight's meeting, mentioned some things, an outline of what was going to be broached tonight. And one of the first things was, does Lakewood really need any growth? And there were several points. One of them was, what does this mean to city finances? And since Dave's an economist, I was very much interested in hearing a response to that. And I realize sometimes I zone out, so maybe I missed it. But if you wouldn't mind repeating, I know in general terms, we know that residents, housing, as far as the finances of the city, every additional housing unit brings in a certain amount of revenue, taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, there are certain costs servicing that household. And so in general terms, we've always known that housing is basically a net loser to the city's finances. Can you quantify what that loss would be?
I haven't done that analysis for the city of Lakewood. That's really a fiscal impact analysis. Most recently, we've done that analysis for Broomfield and for a couple other communities in the metro area. And on a percentage basis, in terms of the revenues that are brought in against the costs of providing public goods and services to that residential, it's about anywhere between 93 and 95 or so % cost recovery, if you could view it that way.
So like a 5 or 7% loss for each unit that's brought in.
It depends on, and it also really greatly depends on the level of service, because these are highly dependent on, the communities have different levels of service for fire, different levels of service for schools, different levels of service for police, and all the other provisions of community infrastructure that go into it. And so looking at Lakewood's profile I wouldn't anticipate it to be wildly different, but I think that Lakewood's levels of service are different. I think police level of service is higher. I think that some of the other communities' public goods and services are slightly higher. So it would change that slightly.
And of course, we don't do fire and water. Okay, on our next go around, would you be able to quantify that sort of stuff? I mean, that's very important to me, of course.
That would be something we've actually done in the past in advance of a big development. So those numbers are dated, obviously, but I think we could put that together for you, at least to demonstrate what those costs are for the different departments. As you said, there are some services that we don't provide, like fire, et cetera. So yeah, I think we can put that together at least and update it so it's today's costs.
Okay. Now, Dana was mentioning the effect on traffic. Now, she was focusing on commuting, and commuting, in my mind, is 2 trips, 1 out, 1 back. But it seems to me there's also traffic involved in local, going to the store, whatever. I know we're supposed to be taking bikes, but assuming that most people don't, what do we think would be the impact on traffic, for additional housing? And I go, you're going to have to generalize, of course.
Well, that's a really interesting conversation, and maybe we could talk about that offline too as well. I've done a number of studies on economic impact of transportation facilities, not necessarily on the economic impacts of everybody just hopping on their bike and going to work or going to the grocery store, but there are definite and measurable impacts of people changing modes. And as Nanette indicated, there are, Dr. Cog looks at mode splits for all the different communities when they're doing their sophisticated urban sim focus 2 activity-based model. But there are definitely quantifiable impacts that the different modes might have.
Let me clarify. I realize I was being a little flippant there. Never mind the bike things. What I was trying to say is non-commuting trips. Can we get a sense of what that impact will be on our traffic?
Institute of Transportation Engineers has a bunch of standards that say how many trips are developed by each type of land use. Typically on a household, it's about 10 trips per household per day. Yeah.
Those are average trips. So in the recent past, I've done a study with Dr. Cog data on transportation infrastructure and its economic impacts. The average trips per day is about 8.5 trips per household per day. Those are trips to grocery store, trips where you forgot something somewhere. Now, keep in mind too, a trip though in that nomenclature is point A to point B, not in when you're thinking it's a round trip. This is so 8.5 trips per day is actually for what you are thinking of as a trip. So out and back is 1 trip, but in the standard nomenclature for travel demand modeling, 1 trip is just one way, point A to point B.
So what I got out of it was at a bare minimum, we're looking at least 4 trips
4 to 5
for every housing unit we bring in.
Yes.
Councilor Gutwein, then Abel, then Shakti.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering if we have any information about the salaries, the average salaries of the jobs that we were looking at, like the public administration salaries, to understand if there is housing that is affordable if you have that job in the city of Lakewood. And I don't know who that's a question for.
Yes, we have average salaries, but each company, usually company comes in and has all those stratifications of the different levels of jobs. But we have some sense of that, and we could put some stuff together and work with David on that.
Okay, I think it would be helpful to understand if it's affordable for the people to live in who work in Lakewood to live in Lakewood, and of course there's the other question of whether or not they want to, which other people got to earlier, but I'm curious if it's even affordable. Okay, my next question is, you talked about risk analysis and you mentioned risk analysis as part of determining whether or not a development moves forward in the city or not, like a go or no go. And I was wondering if, and it's some of the impacts or one of the components of that risk is uncertainty in the process and length of time to get a project done in the city of Lakewood. And in our city, we have some areas that would, I think, are more receptive to growth or maybe want to see revitalization, and some areas in our city that do not want to see additional growth. Is that risk analysis done as a city, or is it more localized so that if there was something that was creating additional risk in one part of the city, would that impact potential development across the city altogether? Or could you help me understand that a little more?
Not necessarily. No, it's really when a market study is conducted and when a developer is assessing risk of a project feasibility, it is depending on the market and the capture and the influences, those things are simply localized. It doesn't, if something's happening on the other side of the city, it doesn't affect.
So they could analyze that certain types of projects might be more receptive in the city than others, for example.
I'm going to answer that twofold. David's correct when it's looking at some of the risks, whether it be land cost or the infrastructure costs, et cetera, like that. When we get to process questions of moving through the city process, that predictability becomes uniform across the city because first in is the first out project. So that's a consistent, whether you're going through our site plan process or building process or anything like that. Our general policy right now is the first project in is the first project out. They take it all the way through.
Okay, thank you.
And so then our times it depends on also the peaking. You know, we have certain times of the year where we're getting ready for construction season and the building department, the planning department, and public works department see a mass influx of applications coming in. And
okay.
I was going to add to that and just mention a great example is what we're experiencing currently after the big hailstorm and the demand on permits for roofing and how that has caused our employees to have to work extra hours. We've brought in additional employees to work overtime and on weekends to help with that demand. So they're doing a great job, but it's taken a little more time because of the amount of demand from the hailstorm.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. And then the last thing is I think I also want to build on what Councilor Frank said about looking at the different types of homes, and that helps me understand what you were talking about evolving and adapting to the changes. And I think that a couple of additional factors that I'd like to add into that mix is that, and Councilor Roybal mentioned this too, that, you know, as the population grows of the Denver metro area, we have additional challenges like water supply energy use, we have sustainability goals. How are we going to meet our sustainability goals as we grow? And so I think that adds an increased premium on the importance of putting in place sustainability goals, energy efficiency goals, putting solar on our homes, having bike racks, for example, at new buildings. Maybe we can also partner with, have a partnership between our developers and the public transit to provide passes to homes along the light rail to further encourage that. So I look forward to an out-of-the-box thinking discussion when we get to the policy about how we can reduce traffic and increase efficiency through those different means. Thank you.
Councilor Abel?
Thank you. You refer to in the notes that came with tonight's presentation, the staff memorandum, you refer to folks who work for technical firms. I think we're referring to millennials in large part, and it seems to me that we all tend to look at millennials as technically oriented people, but I'll bet you there's a number of them that are school teachers, policemen, firemen, firefighters rather, waitresses, chefs, whatever. It would seem that we should expand that view. Have you you refer in here to what their employers say they're looking for? Have you talked to some of our current large employers in Lakewood, like Tarumo, the school district, police agencies, and find out what their folks are looking for? Can we do that, or have we done that?
We have done that. That's where these data are from.
Great. Also, you refer in that same memorandum in 2 or 3 places to survey findings and interviews indicate and that sort of thing. Can you, in the report next time, tell us, kind of annotate those surveys, footnote those surveys, and share with us the basis of your extrapolations, please?
So the report that we will prepare will have I think will be beneficial to all of you to review because it will contain the entirety of our analysis, our data sources, the methodologies, the findings, and so that you can look at them at your leisure, at your own pace.
And the results of those surveys themselves.
Yes, and we can include in an appendix the actual survey instrument, so you can see all the questions in their exact form, how they were asked, and all the results.
Excellent, thank you. And you've been very thorough in all of this, and I wouldn't expect less in the report. Thank you very much.
Councilor Shakti.
When you talked about the cost of new houses that was developed in other communities, the average cost of a new house, did that include the increased sales tax revenue?
From consumption, from new consumption, I imagine.
Maybe I'm just getting a little tired. What are the...
well, just if more people live in the community, it seems like more people are going to spend money in the community, and we will make more money off of sales tax.
That depends on the income level. We refer to it as disposable income.
It just seems like in looking at that, however we're going to look at it, we should include... Maybe we can't get real specific with that. It's not as easy to measure, but some sense of that should be part of that conversation, because that's part of the overall picture of the costs and benefit financially to the city.
The answer is yes, but it wasn't under the housing study. And it was a linkage that we had some technical analysis done for retail, and I've talked to EPS of trying to make that linkage.
because it's important in certain segments of our city because we get pushed. How come we don't get business X, business Y? And it has a lot to do with the disposable income. So in the work that we did with the one firm we've worked with, they gave us an aggregate for Lakewood, and we tried to focus it on by areas, and we're not getting the kind of the detailed analysis that we need to do, and it's better suited for a firm like EPS to do that. So we haven't done that yet. Does that help you? It doesn't give you the answer that you want,
Yeah.
but we're going to look at that in the next year, year and a half.
Well, and we're talking about bringing forward old data to try to find these numbers in Lakewood. And if we can think of it in terms of some number of what that means, that's great. If we can't, then at least it needs to have a little plus whatever this does to sales tax.
I think we can do that at least through some broad trends in terms of increase in population and increase in sales tax revenues, or that we can do that kind of, it'd be kind of crude data, and you can look at that and make some assumptions.
Okay. I thought Councilor Wickman made a good point in the that, I mean, like if people move here to be near jobs, they're going to drive other times too. And so is that a net benefit or not in terms of traffic, if we're just looking at traffic? And I think it's worth noting that driving during peak times is the bigger problem, although probably, I mean, I think trips to and from work are very often during peak times, but a lot of the other things we do are also during peak times, but I think that's really what it comes down to. And then I wanted to second the, or thank Councilor Franks for the let's be creative comment. I completely agree. And so then it gets into everybody needs to give us good ideas about how to be creative. Because I think that as we get into the details of this, that will be the project. That's all I have.
Great. So Councilor Wickman has some questions, and then for the rest of the group, if we have more questions, let's get the questions done, but we also have public comment waiting. So if we want to save our comments for the very end, that's fine as well. Councilor Wickman.
Just wanted to make a comment about the sales tax effect. We traditionally think in terms of whenever we bring in new households, that would be new customers for our businesses, and ergo we would get sales tax. I'm not sure if that model is working anymore. We're seeing the internet sucking away more and more of the economic activity, and with that, our sales tax. And what's really frightening to me is I'm seeing a transition now. You're seeing commercial properties, retail, that are now going out of business and instead being converted over to more apartments. A classic example is the Target store, on Colfax. It's gone and it's replaced with more apartments. So we're losing revenue sources and bringing in more revenue users. And if that trend continues with the millennials are supposedly a lot more internet users, this trend continues, our old model of bringing in more heads on the beds, I think is not only obsolete, but counterproductive.
And I think that's an interesting balance. If you look at some of the retail in Ward 4, some of it's been vacant since I was a kid. And now you're finally starting to see like Fox Point and some of the other properties start to fill up with different retail because there has been some growth. So it's that balance, but the future is going to be tough for retail.
Yeah, and the look of retail is going to be different. We know it's going to be smaller footprint. It's not going to be the same size footprint. So when you have a strip center that's highly vacant, it is trying to repurpose that to something that's more entertainment, and it's going to look different. It won't look like the standard strip center. I think that's going to be an important focus in the next 5 years for us in the economic development realm for you. And I believe we can still encourage the sales tax or the revenue that the city needs to provide the services. So it's trying to find that right mix, but it won't look the same like you're saying that it is right now.
Okay, so I just have one more question that has to do with AMI. When you had that chart up, we have very little in that lowest part, right, which is the -30. I mean, very minimal, I think probably sporadic, wouldn't that say? Because most of our affordable housing units are still mixed as far as mixed income. Is that accurate? So the -30 probably makes up the smallest part. Okay. All right. Do you have clear direction?
Mayor, can I
Ms.
provide a
Hodson.
summary of the to-do list we got this evening?
Thank you for keeping
Sure,
that.
I kept a running list. We will post all of this info on the website. And we're also asked to have hard copy of the slides available. We'll do that. How about if you send us an email if you want a hard copy, so that we don't, because some of you would rather have it electronically. So know that it will be posted electronically, but if you want a hard copy, just send an email to me and I'll make sure you get it. We're going to ask Metro West Housing Solutions to come at some point and speak to City Council about some of the issues around affordable housing and some of the questions that you had to do a deeper dive in the work that they do and the provisions in our community. We're going to see if we can get some commuting info from Dr. Cog. There's some information requested about the issue of undue concentration out of the Houston, Texas case, and David offered to follow up on that. We're going to look at what is the cost of city services in today's dollars to residential, to Councilor Wickman's question. We'll provide average salaries of jobs and a comparison, increase of housing, and what's that been with our increase of sales tax revenue. So those are the follow-ups that we have. This was kind of a disorganized list, but we'll make sure we do that.
I think that's a great start. And we heard tonight the developer side, but I think it might be beneficial for council and the public to hear our side as far as when you come into an application, because you hear, well, what about stormwater? What about traffic? To understand our process as well, to make sure that people know you don't come in and just build something without us saying, well, no, you have to abide by these stormwater standards. You have to improve these facilities, things like that. So there's probably a developer packet that we give, and that might be beneficial information for everybody to understand what that looks like.
Okay, that's on the list.
Okay, thank you. All right, I will now open public comment. Thank you to all the folks who've been patient. It's a little bit different how we did it tonight, and that's just how the chips fell. So I will start with Mr. Chisholm, and then Ms. Rashke, you'll be next. Again, 3 minutes, 2.5 green, 30 seconds yellow, red at the end. And if you didn't have a chance to sign up, we'll make sure that you absolutely have a chance to speak. Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you give that back to Scott Coop? Scott Coop.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
City Council, Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. My name is Jay Chisholm. I am the property owner at 1595 Carr Street, Lakewood, Colorado. As you know, the property fell victim to a smash and grab robbery. Some guys ran a car into the front of the building in an attempt to break in and steal guns. This pushed the front of the building in 5 inches and caused $30,000 worth of damage, and still counting. This is Unit C and D. This is a high crime area, and we are trying to do some urban renewal, but the city has been standing in our way for a 1.5 years. Please help us. My wife and I are crime victims, and now on top of this, we have no insurance to cover the cost. We are senior citizens at retirement age. My wife is on Social Security. We do not make a lot of money. 1.5 years ago, we tried to fix these units so we could get insurance. We went about it the wrong way and are sorry. However, We are now in a bad situation and need the city's help more than ever. We need a permit for units C and D so we can repair the units and get insurance before this happens again. We may not have another 30 or 40,000 in the future. We may have to abandon this building. Would the city like to be the new owner of the gun room with a big hole in the front of it? Earlier today, I again submitted building plans to the city with the following concession. The west bathroom has been removed. The city engineer said this restricts the flow of the floodwaters. Folks, the plans are done. The work has been started. To be allowed to continue where we left off is the quickest way to a solution to this problem. And this is how it would look. So I beg you to please help us and help yourselves. We've been begging for a permit to finish the building for a year and a half. All this time we have been without insurance. We knew something bad was going to happen sooner or later, and now it has. Please do not delay us any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chisholm. Ms. Rashke, come on down. Welcome. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Paul and members of council. My name is Andrea Rashke, R-A-S-C-H-K-E, and I live at 10495 West Iliff Avenue. I appreciate that the concern regarding the use of fire pits and portable fireplaces may seem trivial to many. However, a recent post on Nextdoor, followed by dozens of comments, underscores a point that I wish to make. Until you have experienced an extreme inundation of smoke that you have no control over, it's hard to understand the potential severity of this problem. The last thing I want to do is to curtail an activity enjoyed by many of my fellow Lakewood citizens. What I do want to do is to find a way to help those of us who risk being impacted by an otherwise innocuous use of a recreational fire. A family behind me often enjoys roasting marshmallows with their kids over a fire pit. I'm sure I'm oblivious to most of the times when they use it. However, our house will occasionally fill with smoke if our swamp cooler is on. Their in-ground fire pit is about 30 feet from my hay storage building. Early one evening, I went out to feed the horses, only to find it filled with a thick haze of smoke. I am not exaggerating in saying I could not even see 10 feet in front of me. Imagine having to sit through this meeting in that environment. Thankfully, I didn't have to stay long, but I did receive several compliments on my campfire perfume at a meeting later that evening. An elderly lady on our street became discouraged when her swamp cooler would draw in smoke from a neighbor using a chimney. Calling West Metro for help was futile because she was continually told that the fires were in compliance. She built her home in the early 1950s. It was paid for, her son lived next to her, her health was deteriorating, and she was left with no options but to endure the smoke. Even if the HOA on our single street were to have placed restrictions on open fires, the streets on either side of us each belong to their own HOAs. I know all of you provide the best quality of life for all of us. There are ordinances for barking dogs, how long an RV can be on the street, where people can or can't smoke cigarettes, and that prohibit fireworks. You also strive to create amenities to enhance livability, as well as a clean environment, bike lanes, park improvements, and sustainable living solutions. There are presently 0 alternatives to help those who are negatively impacted by recreational fires. I can personally attest that all things being equal for today's limits, an otherwise innocent burn can have dire consequences simply depending on the weather, which none of us can legislate. Speaking with a neighbor may not be an option if you're not sure where the fire is coming from or if you worry about retaliation. Per tonight's housing study presentation, a top priority for people is a sense of safety and security. A person's home should be their sanctuary. One solution might be to eliminate wood-burning fires while also allowing natural gas, propane, charcoal, and other low or no smoke emitting fuels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Terry Ray? Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Adam Paul and all. I'm Terry Ray. I live in Sun Valley. I'm very grateful for a couple of minutes to talk with you. Well, I'll jump right in. My husband and I were just watching TV one night in April when all of a sudden we realized our house was on fire. It was alarming. It was startling. Just jump up in a moment of trauma. But turned out to be our neighbor's wood burning fire pit next door. We went over to the neighbors to try and talk about it. Suffice it to say, we did not get the reaction that we would like. And after many conversations, or a few conversations, I should say, and more smoke, we still have a problem. And it seems like no recourse. I want to be clear tonight, I'm talking only about wood burning, including holes in the ground and wood burning pits or units of any kind. Smoke emits some pretty nasty chemicals, including carcinogens and carbon monoxide. I'll be sending each of you some info about smoke by email this evening, and I hope that you'll have time to take a look. Smoke damages lungs, blood vessels, hearts. People most vulnerable to smoke are those with respiratory problems, older people, diabetics, and children. Children, that one gets me, because their lungs are still developing, and they breathe in more air per pound of body mass than adults do. And they're often more active than adults, so they actually breathe in more of the dangerous chemicals. But folks, everybody knows that smoke inhalation is not helpful to our health. And we Lakewoodians, we get it. We get into clean air. We like clean air. There's the smoking ordinance that has been done in the past, the Save the Zone initiative, and Lakewood's sustainability plan, of all things. Wood burning also is inconsistent with Lakewood's sustainability plan. It's Lakewood's heart and soul, the character of the sustainability plan. The really cool thing, though, is that we can still have fires. We can still have fires in which smoke won't inundate other people's houses by using gas-powered units for burning. Wood burning is a fun get-together, but it's health damaging beyond the get-together. I'd like to ask you to consider banning wood burning in Lakewood and limiting burning to gas-powered units. There's so much cleaner burning and don't cause nearly a toxic smoke problem for surrounding areas. Please, we need to ban wood burning as part of our wholesome lifestyle and habitat. We need to ban wood burning because it hurts people. We need to ban wood burning in Lakewood. I thank you so much for taking some time to listen to me tonight.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. Alan? Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Paul, councilors. I'm Alan Heald, and I live in Green Mountain Estates. My comments tonight are about development and the public's role in this process and the proposed change to policies and procedures. Recently, the community of Greenwood Village, which is a suburban city south of Denver, was faced with a developer's proposal to add high-density development on a 25-acre parcel near Orchard Station. The mayor and city council received a lot of comments from citizens expressing their concern about the high-density development and that felt the feeling that it was wrong for the community, so they chose to put it to a public vote, as reported by the Denver Business Journal. The proposal with a public vote was defeated by the people 76% to 24. Meanwhile, in Lakewood, when there were citizen concerns about development in the Rooney Valley, citizens not only did not get a vote on it, we were essentially silenced as public comment was not allowed at the council meeting when the vote was actually taken. So it concerns me what lies ahead for the public's right to comment. On page 38 of the proposed policy and procedures, the language limits public comment on zoning issues by limiting information presented by citizens to those with a legally recognized interest. That term is not defined in the document. It appears to be a polar opposite to current policy, which recognizes the importance of, and I quote, information being presented by competing interests. So the proposed policy seeks to reduce the public's right to present competing information. This concerns me a lot. Also on page 30 is language designed to give the mayor the right to simply shut down public comment at any time, and even amend policy and procedure with less than a majority vote of councilors in order to permanently deviate from the existing agreed-to rules of order, should he or she choose to do so. I'm deeply concerned about this. I'm concerned about changes that would eliminate the public's ability to comment. Fortunately, last Monday, in the workshop, as it was, on policy and procedures, it was decided that a new committee was needed to address concerns about the current proposal before moving it forward to council discussion. I'm very pleased with that decision. Because I think having a working committee comprised of selected council members and the mayor that will provide needed oversight in this development is the right way forward. Lakewood has a council/manager form of government and generally operates according to Robert's Rules of Order. Please do not eliminate proper procedures for governance. This is a city, not a kingdom. Recently, I learned that past attempts to curtail or eliminate public comment in Lakewood failed, and public comment opportunities that were eliminated at one point in time were ultimately reinstated. Let's not waste time going down that road again. In closing, I want to thank the councilors that have expressed concern about the proposed changes to policy and procedure. I want to thank you for keeping representative government alive and for standing up for the public's rights. Representative government works when communication is a two-way street. It does not work by telling the public to sit down and shut up after you are elected. I've commented before on the importance of working together, and I saw nods of agreement up on the dais when I made those comments. Let's keep that going. Shutting out the public is not working together. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Alex?
Thank you for listening tonight. I'm Alex Plotkin, live by Green Mountain. And so it is interesting to see how diligent the developers are in their ROI calculations and for the equity and the debt that they will need for a given project. If only the same level of diligence was exercised when it comes to the environmental and societal debt that will be incurred, or how much environmental equity will be sacrificed due to a project being pushed through by a developer. Imagine if we had a real public transit system, a system where most people could use it to get to work, a doctor, entertainment, and other daily chores. Hence, a number of people who currently have 2 cars or more per household could get by with just 1 to mostly use it on the weekends. That means that any given household could be saving thousands of dollars they currently waste on the vehicle itself, the fuel, the insurance, and the maintenance. That means that eventually millions of dollars in the city alone could be diverted elsewhere to things such as retirement savings, college funds, pursuit of hobbies, and of course shopping. Never mind the reduction in car accidents and the negative economic impact related to those. Now consider the dead zone of public transit, amenities, and entertainment around the Green Mountain area. Solterra is a great study in how to build a development that is not sustainable in any sense, be it public transit, amenities, or environmental. So going forward, why can't we balance out the mistakes of the past and current developments with the ones that alleviate some of these issues? So where's the train stations at Alameda, Morrison Road, and every other major road along 470? Where are the plans to build a new school to serve the common developments? Where are the pre-designated areas for the wildlife corridors? Where's the wildlife bridge going across the 470? I know it's also a county and a state issue, but I keep hearing about all this collaboration that's been happening amongst the cities. And so this would be one of the prime issues to take on. Those decisions should not be left up to a shiny sales pitch from a developer, but be led by a city setting policies beneficial to the environment, the community, and the local economy, and not a development group from out of town. If the city takes the lead in sustainable development and grows, those who value such things will come here anyways, and as shown by the presentation today, they will even consider paying a premium in order to do so. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.
Mr. Margotti? Do you want to speak? Mr. Margotti?
Oh, me?
Sorry.
Oh, gee, thanks.
You raised your hand.
Oh, nice to see everybody this evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Welcome. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council, and all you nice folks that are here yet. I just want to talk to you from a layman's term as far as the discussion that we had earlier here that you had. As far as something that Mr. Abel said, an apartment building is a vertical neighborhood. You're closer to those people than you are when you're living in a home on a half acre or quarter acre. You participate in more things, and those of you that have ever lived in an apartment building don't realize that. We have a lot of things going for you when you live in an apartment building. As far as Mr. Wickman's comment, Lakewood is a shopping desert at this time. I looked at the map that they had as far as restaurants that were listed on Colfax. There were red balls all up and down the street. Well, there are no restaurants on Colfax. There are fast food operations. They're in and out. As far as people working in Lakewood from outside the city, they come to work 5 days a week. They pick up their check, they take it home and spend it somewhere else. If they were living closer to their job, they would spend their money in Lakewood. It just seems to me that people don't understand economics when it comes to this. Without warm bodies, without people working here and spending their money here, Lakewood will not thrive. As far as population, there's a population growth here. I see more toddlers today than I've seen in 20 years up and down the street. My neighborhood's population has probably increased 60% because of that. Where there were 2 in a family, there are now 3 in a family, 4 in a family. So that's all I have to say. I want people to consider the fact that we need growth. We need growth to survive. We need growth to bring in businesses. And that's for sales tax. It'll offset anything that you do with sales tax. Thank you for taking my time.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to eating at your restaurant. Anybody else? Come on down. Bernie, you can go after Nancy if that's okay. Or before.
Hi, I'm Bernie Bartel. We've lived here in Lakewood about going on 47 years. The good thing is about that the Amazon bought Whole Foods, which are the stake in Amazon. But the next thing is we're going to have drones. You talk about hail on your roof. What did the drones drop apples, potatoes, tomatoes, and melons on your roof? That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Bernie, come back here and tell us about German Fest before you go. Don't miss that opportunity.
Yes. Thanks. I would like to invite everybody that's here in this room to come to the 10th Annual German Fest. Of course, we don't really have a neighborhood. We don't really have a festival where all the people of Lakewood could come together. We haven't got a big enough venue. And I'm trying to do this with the 10th Annual German Fest, where all people can come together, regardless where you come from. We have really good German food, German beer. We have entertainment for the whole family, including kids. We have face painting, we have balloon twisting, we even have a magician there. And we also have soap operas, and we have, of course, we're going to march around the amphitheater where the German bands play music and we can march. And you get to exercise to do this as well and have fun. Hopefully you all show up at the German Fest. Thank you.
Thank you. When is it? Oh, no, you said July. July what?
Okay, it's Saturday, July 21st, Saturday 22nd, Sunday the 23rd.
Great.
So it's really going to be fun. We hope we have good weather and lots of beer and food. Thanks.
Oompa, thank you. Nancy.
He's a hoot. I can't wait to go. Thank you, Mayor Paul and City Council. My name is Nancy Palazzi, and I live in Ward 5 and a lifetime resident of Lakewood. On Friday, the community was notified of the Red Rocks Community Meeting presented by Ventana Capital. The meeting was tonight from 6 to 8. And of course, we have City Council here tonight as well. When Ventana Capital and the city was asked why they planned this community meeting tonight, both responded by saying it was a coincidence. Is it a coincidence that this developer set the date the same night the city is presenting the housing study? A question I'm asking, and so should the community. This meeting was to explain their intentions and project plan for this area, which is part of the Rooney Valley expansion plan. Here's what was presented briefly as I was there tonight. 1,200 new homes, apartments, and possibly condos. 4 small parks, some open space land, 30 acres of commercial or retail space, and giving Jeffco Schools only 13 acres of the 20 acres they requested to possibly build a K-8 school in that area. The other 7+ acres that Jeffco Schools would need would have to come from a different developer. So how are they going to pay for this school? And my concern is the Green Mountain Articulate area cannot absorb these kids that would be possibly coming into the area. They told me tonight that their intentions are to bring their development plan to City Council in September for a vote on this expansion. And if approved, it will begin construction spring of 2018. I am against this expansion, and I hope that the City Council will be as well when that time comes. Morrison has given up and they want nothing to do with this land. It is now up to City Council. Thank you for your time.
Anybody else? All right, I'll close public comment. Mara? Anybody else after Mara? All right, after Amara, we're going to close it.
Good evening, all. Mine is a comment of process regarding the meeting tonight by Ventana and the new Red Rock Center and the annexation into Lakewood. I would like to ask the mayor, the mayor's office, and the council to take a role of leadership in dealing with this developer and any other that wishes to work in Lakewood, to expect and to demand that they demonstrate respect to our citizens and respect to you, the city council members. It is not a real or transparent or authentic effort to disseminate information to affected citizens in an affected city, to announce something on a Friday afternoon informally via a citizen working for you for a Monday night meeting. It is not authentic to intentionally conflict with a city council meeting so that no city councilor can be present at these meetings, and many citizens who are interested in being present cannot be there. It is not authentic to answer in writing to citizens, oh, it was just a coincidence, when they've been working with city staff for years, knowing the agendas and knowing a weekly standing meeting. So I know and I trust that the mayor's office and the city councilors really want to have our best interest at heart. And I know that you understand we elected you to represent us, not follow developers' leads. So I'm asking you to take a lead with this developer and any other to let them know in no uncertain terms that if you wish to develop or ask Lakewood to annex, that you are authentic, you are respectful, and you are honest about meetings that you hold to inform citizens of what you're doing and provide ample opportunity for citizens and city councilors to be present. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm looking, that wasn't a meeting that the Lakewood had anything to do with. So we didn't coordinate it, we didn't plan it, we didn't notice it wasn't our meeting. And further, I think if council would have been in attendance, there are some quasi-judicial ramifications for that as well. So a property owner in another jurisdiction has every right to have meetings and do as they feel, as they wish. If he decides he wants to put an application into the city of Lakewood, which my understanding he hasn't done, that will trigger our process. So right now it's not a Lakewood process, and I appreciate that you were able to go, and I'd continue to work with them in that jurisdiction until and if that application comes into the city of Lakewood. Couple different things I just wanted to touch on. I'll let Mayor Pro Tem Harrison touch on the fire pits. But I did want to touch on one thing. I've been on council for 9 years. Nobody's ever been denied the right to testify at a zoning hearing. And if that's what the policies and procedures state, that's why we're looking at that, but nobody's ever been denied the right. And public comment was not denied for anybody who wished to speak at the 4 different meetings that we had related to the Rooney Valley. So we did a continuation after public comment was held for about 3 hours, and then we continued that meeting. And if we follow Robert's Rules of Order, that continuation would not allow for public comment because public comment was closed. So I am anxious and look forward to working with the rest of the group. And in my time as mayor, I've never cut public comment or tried to manipulate public comment by any means, nor would I. Mayor Pro Tem Harrison.
Thank you. Andrea and Tina, what I would like to do is, Dana and I would like to meet with you and maybe look at the possibility of working with the other HOAs that are around you, surrounding you, and then also look at if other communities are using a wood burning ban and using the suggestion for the propane. We need to do some research and see if that's possible, but let's work together on that, okay? Thank you.
All right, next up is general business. Anything under general business? Seeing none, executive report, Ms. Hodson.
Yes, very briefly. At the Colorado Municipal League conference last week, I just wanted to recognize an employee, our probation supervisor, Scott Hefty, was awarded and recognized as a municipal hero. And there were many candidates up for this award, and Scott Hefty won it, and it was a a really cool recognition at the big annual luncheon, and Governor Hickenlooper was there. So he got his picture taken with Governor Hickenlooper. Scott Hefty, as you know, does a lot of work in our municipal courts and is really dedicated to veteran issues. And I think all of us couldn't be more proud of him, and we congratulate him. So thank you.
Well, thank you. So I don't really have anything to report. I appreciate everybody hanging out tonight and staying with us and sharing your concerns and comments. And the best part about all of this is, I think for this council in general, we've tried to seek to work together. And I think that's something that this whole group wants to continue to do and not provoke or try to perpetuate a us versus them mentality. We're in this together. We have issues. It's nothing that other communities aren't facing, but we have a lot of smart people out here in the audience. And if we just continue to keep in mind that we love Lakewood and that we care about it and care about its future, we're going to be able to make things happen. So I look forward to that. Mayor Pro Tem Harrison.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to specifically give a big thank you to Renee Jones, a marvelous, talented yoga instructor that got up really, really early last Wednesday morning, drove to Breckenridge, and gave a yoga lesson to about 40 yoga novices at CML. And I wanted to say a big thank you to Renee. We really appreciated that. She is an employee of Lakewood, and she was able to teach the whole state yoga. So thank you very much to Renee. And secondly, I just wanted to say that we will be having our Ward 5 meeting this weekend, Saturday morning, 9 a.m., Bear Valley Church. And it's going to be a really cool topic about how to get involved in the boards and commissions, the different opportunities that are available, as well as other kind of volunteerism. So we'd love to see you there, 9 a.m., Bear Valley Church. Thank you.
Council President Roybal.
No report.
Councilor Shakti.
No report.
Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. Ward 1 will not be having a July meeting this month. And second, tomorrow night at 6:30 at Lakewood High School, there'll be a meeting regarding parking issues around Lakewood High. Anybody is invited, and my kudos to our city manager who has allowed and facilitated a mediator to come to the meeting to get things going and get us started in the right direction. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you for that reminder too, Councilor Johnson. Councilor Abel.
No report.
Vincent. Councilor Franks.
I did want to comment that I would have liked if the community, they had had that community meeting on another night, because while there could be some future quasi-judicial component, I think it's important for us to be at these meetings. I would certainly keep an open mind, always absorb new information, but I wouldn't, I would have attended and then just disclosed it if something came for us later. I think that is a disservice to the community when you hold it at a competing time when I'm not there to represent. So I just did want to comment. We didn't schedule the meeting. It wasn't on us, but I'm just making sure that future developers hear that I don't think that is a service to our community, and it just comes off a bit disrespectful because it doesn't allow me to connect with people who've been reaching out to me. So, but I would have attended had it not been on council night. So thank you.
Councilor Gutwein.
Thank you. Just wanted to add that I also would have liked to have known when that meeting was going to be so that I could let people know about that community meeting. All of us got a lot of citizen contact about the Rooney Valley, and I think it would have been good if we could have shared the meeting information with our community. So updates, last Wednesday I went to the Alameda West Kiwanis Club to kind of celebrate a partnership to build a nature playscape at Bear Creek Lake Park, which was it's really cool, and we're really lucky to have such great partners in our Kiwanis clubs. I learned a lot about Kiwanis clubs that night. That was my first time ever going to any kind of Kiwanis event. But the Playscape is very cool, and it's a nature-oriented thing that will be at Bear Creek Lake Park. So go check that out. And then also this coming Wednesday, in Ward 5, there's a Chemo Water District community meeting at Carmody. There's going to be a vote this fall about whether or not to opt into the sanitation district. So I just wanted to let people know in Ward 5 they should have gotten a notice, but that is this Wednesday. Karen, is it at 6? At 6 p.m. at Carmody. And I will be there. All right, thank you.
Councilor Wickman? Councilor Coop? Michelle? Annette? Tim? Kathy? All right. Thank you to our police agents. Appreciate you guys hanging out. Enjoy your night. Be safe. We're adjourned at 10:23 p.m.